So good morning again, everybody. Welcome. My name's Amy Conrad. If you have not met me before, I see a lot of new faces. Delighted to have you here with us. I would like to, just a couple of really quick reminders that coffee and those snacks out there are for you, so please help yourself. We will take one morning break. And a couple of things, we do ask that you wear your mask in the room. I know we're so tired of wearing masks, but hang in there, we're almost out. But I really do request that you wear your mask while you're here. Staff, presenters, feel free, obviously, to take off your mask when you're up the front. There is a sign-in sheet in the back. If you have not signed in, please do that. Make sure we have your email, because we'd like to stay in touch. And there are on each table, there are evaluations. If you find that you have to leave early today, please fill that out. This is your day, and we want to make sure that it's a good day for you. We want to make sure next year is even better. So please let us know what you would like to see, what's most helpful, etc. All right. So my name, as I said, is Amy Conrad. I'm the director of the National Center for Mobility Management. You guys are probably familiar with us. NCMM, as we call it, is a technical assistance center funded by the Federal Transit Administration. We're in our 8th year. We hope to keep going. We have a couple more years to convince FTA we're a good idea. And so go away, put in a good word for us. We're operated jointly by my home organization, the Community Transportation Association of America, Easter Seals, and APTA. And our goal is to work to promote customer-centered mobility strategies to advance good health, economic vitality, self-sufficiency, and community. As you can tell, our mission is broad, and we really think of ourselves kind of with an internal and an external focus. The internal focus is on you guys. How can we help you do what you do every day, which we know covers a swath of activities? How can we help you do that every day? Our external focus is on our non-transportation partners. I know those are who you work with every day. So we are trying at our level as well to really drill down into housing and justice involved and food access and all those social determinative health destinations that are so important for people. Here's our staff. You may know some of us, some may new faces. Judy Shanley is our director from Easter Seals, and they're going to go across the board. Will Reckley, who I'm sorry cannot be with us today, but he's been with NCMM for about 2 years. Is 2 years, Kirby, or 3? 2 years. In the back, I'm delighted we have Kirby Wilhelm with us. He's also been here with us about 2 years, and then Art Gazzetti is our rep from APTA. On the bottom, we have what I would call maybe our adjunct staff. Janae Futrell on the left, she heads up our efforts in One Call, One Click and MOS, Mobility as a Service. Kevin Chambers is our technologist. He's always there to answer your questions. I think he even has an email that says technologist@nc4mm.org. I think that's his email. But anytime you have a question about technology, he is there for you. The FTA pays for us to pay for him. So he's there for you, and you don't have to pay. And then Carol Co-Chair Bryant is our evaluator, and especially if you're involved in our grants, you'll definitely be hearing from her. Our schedule, we have a morning program. It's going to go to about 11:30, thereabouts. We have 4 presentations. The first one, I'm very excited. And you have the agenda at your place. Equity and transportation. Then we're going to hear from our host state, Virginia, on innovative services in the Commonwealth. Then we're going to look at, we have 3 really innovative projects that we've either funded through our grants or that CTAA has been involved in on cross-sector partnerships. And then we're going to have a presentation by Zoom from Belgium and from Sweden on MOS. So I'm real excited about that presentation, so stay to that. Then we will all of you are included in the luncheon, and if you don't have a ticket, me, we'll cover you. We've got you taken care of. And that will walk across to the convention center. It's right across the street. The convention center, as you probably know, is cut to 2 buildings. This is the building right across from the Marriott. We're going to go strictly right across the street for lunch. And then we come back and have the unconference, and we'll cover over that in a minute. And then The unconference was split up. We'll have this room split up into one and then two rooms. And then we're going to gather back at the end at 4 for some closing remarks. Then our day will be done. So, the unconference. So hopefully you read about it in our newsletter and our emails to you. This is something you guys asked for in 2019. So hopefully you guys will make this what you hope it to be. So what happens is for all from this point through to lunch, through the time we break for lunch, over on that table over there are half sheets of paper and markers. If you want to lead a session, whether that is a discussion, you can just have a discussion, or if you have something you want, a project you want to share and get feedback, or if you have a process you want to share and get feedback on, or just let everybody know it, we want you to set up a session. And it's very informal. You just gather in a room and you run it the way you want to run it. If you suggest a session, you facilitate it. So the way this works is you write the name of your session plus your name on those pieces of paper. With blue tape, put it on the whiteboard. Please do not write on the whiteboard, obviously, unless you're with those markers. And then at lunchtime, we will grid that. So we'll have 3 different times. There'll be 50-minute sessions. There will be one at 1, one at 2, one at 3. And we'll have 3 different rooms. So we'll have 9 sessions altogether. And so depending on how many suggestions we get from you guys, we may have to combine some, or we may have enough to cover those 9. So please, if there's a topic you want to talk about, one topic I am going to suggest, I haven't written down yet, is a follow-up to our equity presentation this morning. And our presenter has agreed to come in and kind of participate with us. So that will be one session. And then I believe our Virginia mobility managers may be leading some other sessions and maybe some other. So that's what the unconference is. So again, be thinking about that, and on the break or as you think about it, please write those topics down and give them over there. Herbie's in the back. He will be facilitating the unconference part of our workshop. So ask him if you have any questions. Herbie, did you stand up so everybody can see? Thank you. Also sitting at the table with Kirby is someone we just stole. We are very delighted to announce that we will be having a new NCMM deputy director joining us. He will be joining us right for Thanksgiving. We'll have a lot to give thanks for over the holiday. Bill Wagner from New York, some of you may know him. Bill, go ahead and stand up if you don't mind. Bill has run several programs for the Get There program up in Binghamton, New York. Very experienced, and I know he's going to really enhance our program. I'm really delighted to welcome him to our team. You have a lounge just for you. Obviously, it's not open today because you're here, but it will be open all day tomorrow. It won't quite look this nice. We tried. I'm sorry. No couches, no coffee. There will be coffee, and it's just for you guys. It's for you, a place for you guys to sit, catch up on your emails, chat with other mobility managers. When the poster session is done, we'll be moving the posters in there from the mobility. We have 6 posters. Is that right, Kirby? Do you remember 4 or 5? 4, 5. Can't see fingers. Somewhere. So we'll move the posters from the mobility managers. We will move into the lounge. So please take advantage of that space. It's over in the convention center. It's E10. It's right near the E10A. So just really quick before we go on to our first speaker, what's coming to NCMM? First, this session for next year. So we know with COVID, this is very unusual for us to have 2 expos within almost 6 months of each other. Well, actually, they are. But we will be having another mobility management forum on May 10th. Please mark your calendars. And again, help us create the content for that. On your evaluation sheet, please write down what you would like to see for next year's forum. If you have ideas, if you have a presentation you'd like to give, it's all about building the mobility management field. We're also going to be announcing very soon, this is all the work is done for it, we need to do a few tweaks, that you all will be able to, if you remember when you signed up for a newsletter or you signed up for an e-learning course, you had to create different sign-up. We're consolidating all those into one sign-up. All those who are signed up for our e-learning and our newsletter will be automatically transitioned over to this. We will ask you then, you will get an email, we'll ask you to fill out your profile, but the beauty of this is that will lead to networking opportunity. We're going to ask you to identify in here where have been your areas of accomplishment? What have you worked on that you're most proud of? And then people will be able to search on that, and you can create a group of people who have worked on that one issue, so you guys can talk, communicate. So look for this to come. There will be a lot more details about it in our newsletter, and hopefully if you haven't gotten our newsletter, please sign up for that. Our grants, we're doing these grants annually now. It's a lot of work, but we really love our grants. So we are in the middle. We just closed we're in the selection process for our number 3 down there, the pilot grants. They'll kick off probably in the new year and go through September. But we do the same round of those 3 phases of grants next year. So again, look maybe late spring, early summer for an announcement of the planning grant. And then our planning grantees, if their team is still together, still committed, and they still want to move forward, they're transitioned into those learning launch or proof of concept grants. And then the pilot grants are open competition. And we just closed those and are making, again, those selections right now. We will be creating, we are almost finished creating actually, a new mobility as a service resource center for you guys. There's a lot of information. We really believe that mobility as a service is a strategy that's going to help bring us into the future. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. We do see one call, one click as a step along the way getting there. But look for this new resource center, and again, that'll be announced in our newsletter. A lot of work has gone into this center. Janae Futrell has kind of led that effort. We're adding new e-learning courses, one that Kirby's been very active in, e-learning course in mobility management for non-transportation professionals. So if you work with other sectors and they're like, well, what is mobility management? What's my role in it? This is the course for them. It's actually an animated course. It should be quite easy. I think sessions, 7 to 10 minutes. There are 4 modules. So that's coming on the line. And again, all our e-learning courses, of course, are free. We've got a course that we're developing now on choosing the right type of partner agreement. At what level, how formal do you want to get? When do you need to get that MOU, MOA, et cetera? We're hoping that'll be live within a few months. And then suggestions from you. We don't want to develop these courses in a vacuum. We want to hear from you. What is it you would like us to contact experts, have them develop a course for? What do you need? So please let us know. Finally, here's an opportunity going to be coming out very soon. We've done this in the past. We didn't do it during COVID. We're going to pick this back up again. If you have an issue within your community that you would like to pull together a full-day meeting, have NCMM staff come out and help facilitate that. That's what this is all about. So look for more information on that. What's continuing? Our blog. I hope you've noticed a difference in our blog. We've actually hired 2 outside bloggers because we just couldn't keep up with the content. We give them topics. They go research and they write up blogs. Like this is the example in the middle. We heard about mobility as a service launch in Scotland. We wanted to know what that was like, so he with them and wrote that up. So please keep an eye on our blogs. We publish, Kirby would say what, 6 to 8 blogs a month, somewhere along that line. So please keep an eye on those. I don't know how many of you have used our advanced search feature. It still needs a few tweaks. But the idea is that you can search across anything on our website. We know there's a ton of information there. You can search through all of we have a news feature that most days we upload, we curate the news so you don't have to. So we upload news articles that should be and hopefully are important for you. And so you can search them. You don't have to kind of scroll through. You can search them with the search feature. You can search our blogs with the search feature. You can search anything on our site, any and everything here. And in addition, I don't know if you can see at the very top, there's a little box you can click. You can search NCAT site. You can search NADTC site. Search other TA center site with one search, one go. Again, this is just our current e-learning courses. And then we have, I don't know how many of you had a look at, we put a lot of work into this, our Health and Transportation Resource Center. We tried to keep this current, so take a look at that. And again, the one call, one click center that's been up for a while. And that's it. So those are my introductory remarks. So with that, I'm going to welcome our first speaker, Tiara Bills. She's going to address equity and participation.
Morning. Thank you so much for having me. An honor and a delight to be with you all this morning. What a great occasion this is, and what an important time. We're on our way to this new age of transport innovation and growing our ability to connect society to opportunities like never before. This is also a defining moment in the quest to advance equity in transport. And also equity and opportunity. Equity in terms of enabling communities to achieve the highest quality of life. I believe that transportation equity and the provision of transportation services for those with the greatest need is the single most important strategic objective for public. And I believe that we all share it. So I've been asked to share with you all and discuss with you today about transportation equity. What does it mean? What is the goal in terms of advancing transportation equity? Why is it important in the transportation industry? And also some practical steps that can be taken to move us from where we are now to a more equitable state. So to guide this discussion, I want to do a few things. I want to start by telling you a bit about myself, how I started this journey as an equity analysis specialist, what I've noticed as this conversation about equity continues to grow, and how I believe we can advance towards this. Then I'll share with you some notes from my ongoing work as in transportation equity, particularly with small and rural communities. And I'll try to distill for you what I think are the 5 most important action items for transportation practitioners. So I come to you from the great city of Detroit, Michigan, where I was born and raised, and where I currently work as an assistant professor at State University, where I currently live with my 3-year-old son and my 3-year-old. I'm a transportation engineer and behavioral scientist by training. In grad school at the University of Berkeley, I studied how travelers make all types of transportation choices, as well as how those choices are driven and how they drive the success of transportation services, policies, and overall. I learned how to model relationships statistically, relationships that I believe everyone in this room is already quite familiar with. For example, that transit availability and quality affect individual travel choices. Things like what modes of transportation to take, when and how often to travel, whether they can get to work and other activities reliably and consistently, whether travelers can earn substantially in terms of their earning potential, whether they can access upward mobility. I've learned about how to model these relationships so that we can identify the regional transportation improvements that will satisfy current as well as future. In graduate school, I also made the connection between transportation planning and the conditions that I observed as a little girl growing up outside of Detroit. I learned that the transportation system does not always work the same way in every community. I learned as a graduate student the theory and the language for identifying and discussing these conditions that I observed firsthand growing up and around Detroit. I can remember riding local bus services to Midtown. This is where our main library is located, where many of Detroit's museums are located. And I'd love to share more of these experiences, but today what I can say is simply that sometimes the bus came and sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it arrived and was on time. I could get to the library within 30 minutes, sometimes the bus simply didn't. So at this age, I was only going to the library or mall, but what if I were an employee, supporting a family, trying to get to work? So needless to say, these experiences helped me to understand very clearly the connection between quality of life and transportation services. Services, they may have been planned equally across Metro Detroit. They certainly didn't feel they were. So planners and other scholars, they've been studying the concept of equity for a very long before I came on the scene. But fast forward 8 to 10 years after I finished doctorate, published education and transportation equity analysis, you're still at a place where we have so much more to learn about equity and how equity affects the lived. So there are two ways that I want to describe my motivation for focusing on equity in transportation, which I think is also true for the transportation field. The first motivation is summarized by a term that I'll borrow from this COVID pandemic. So we all know the term. What do we use to describe those who are at most risk for COVID-19? Those with pre-existing conditions. People with pre-existing conditions are the most vulnerable and have the highest risk for catching COVID-19, experiencing the harshest effects. Well, I submit to you that the same can be said of transportation inequities. Those who are at risk experiencing the worst transportation and being constrained the most from achieving quality of life are those with pre-existing conditions. For choice riders, if the bus doesn't come, what happens? Choice riders, they're able to hail a taxi, Lyft, right? Some mode of transportation that is reliable. What happens? However, those who are job or housing insecure, those who are income constrained, prone to experiencing various forms of discrimination, or who have historically experienced. If the bus doesn't show up for them, well, what does that mean? That might mean a major setback in terms of their ability to income for their families. So just like it's important for healthcare professionals to determine the connection between pre-existing conditions and COVID outcomes, death, absolutely critical for transportation researchers and professionals like yourselves to have a working knowledge of the pre-existing conditions that relate to inequitable outcomes and to work to combat. Now, the second motivation is that new transportation investments can cause further harm to vulnerable minoritized communities. So I mentioned earlier that I have a 3-year-old son, and for some time, I've also been taking care of my 12-year-old, so 3-year-old, 12. Now, in our household, we do a lot of cooking together, and it's almost like a love language, a way for us to bond, show love towards one another. Sometimes get us a little competitive, better than yours. But in our family, each child starts learning to cook at a very young age. Start with snap peas and potatoes, and then you gradually more and more responsibility. Anyway, my niece is learning how to cook, and my son, who's yet only 3, is so eager to learn well. Wants to contribute to the household in his. I'm cooking rice. He's, Mommy, I want to make rice. I'm cooking breakfast. Mommy, I want to make pancakes. He wants to do everything. So, how many of you all may have small children? Okay, a few of you. So you know that the objective is to get food on the table, but also to keep them busy. Right? Of course, my answer is yes, you can participate. I'm going to invest in the things that's going to allow for you to be successful and contribute. uh, So if equality was my goal, I might purchase a bowl for my niece, spoon for my niece, same bowl for my son. But for my niece, she's about my height, so that bowl and that spoon, she can use it, mix up the batter, and do. My son is 3'4", right? Can't get up on the table. Bowl is too big for him. He's going to need some very specific tools in order for him to cook. So, sure, I could dole out equal resources, but if my desire is for him to be successful, I need to understand his needs, and I need to provide them in such a way that he too contributes. How many of you all have seen a 3-year-old try to use a full-size, right? What happens? End up creating more mess with their. So, so what's the point here? New transportation improvements and investment, if clear attention is not paid to mapping right types of improvements to the existing needs, can actually work to widen the gap, or at best allow for pre-existing conditions to prevail and lead to further. So I'll repeat this from earlier. Transportation equity is one of the most important objectives for the transportation industry. Any plan for advancing transportation must both focus on pre-existing conditions as well. So earlier I mentioned that I studied travel models. I work on the data, models, and performance measures that are huge components of the transportation process, with the goal of advancing a new generation of modeling tools and to make them more reflective of behavior and the constraint experienced by the community. These are tools that are used for short-term and long-term planning. And they help us to understand transportation investments and how they can further be used to understand market segmentation, or how are different groups of people impacted by transportation systems and technology. So these types of tools, they're very common. They are the backbone of regional transportation planning, and they can guide as much as $250 million annually decision making. But the most important thing, I think, for this conversation is that these models are estimated using public data sets, being ones that many of you all are familiar with, things like surveys, big data sets that are generated, street light, safe graph, other GPS data sets, and so on. These data all tell us valuable information about travel patterns and service quality of our. So now I'm working on a study funded by the National Science Foundation, where we're developing a small-scale, activity-based travel model for a small region in Michigan, Benton Harbor. So I don't know if I have any Michiganders in here, but this is how we describe where we live. So Detroit is here, and Benton Harbor is on the west. To provide a little more context, Benton Harbor is a very small region, 5,000 residents, and it's one of the poor communities in the state of Michigan, where nearly half of the residents live below. The region is also home to Whirlpool Corporation, this industrial region or industrial. And Benton Harbor residents are hardworking, but many of them don't have access to personal vehicles And what I've learned is that this is also the demographic that least likely to respond to surveys, least likely to participate in generating the data. So going into this project, we knew that we would need to collect some data to ensure high representation of these hard communities and to also build in opportunities to validate our findings way. So we implemented a series of community workshops along with our data where community members could come to the workshop. They could take our survey on paper or online or download smart application. And we also had staff there to explain the survey, why it was important, and what they can expect. We also had staff available to download smart for. I know that community engagement is a big part of what many of you do. So I want to just share a few things from my experience as a researcher and implementing community data. So the first thing that we learned, and again, this might not be new information, but it's really important to talk to community members and to beta test all surveys. Beta testing meaning testing out your survey instrument with the community that you. In beta testing our survey, we learned a ton about local nuance. We learned common names for transit services. We learned about shopping locations that sometimes confused with work locations when looking at data. And in general, we learned all sorts of things that would have rendered our survey not useful. So beta test with community members is important. The next important aspect that we learned about community engagement and data collection was to seek out community advocates first. Seek out community advocates. This can be done by observing who shows up consistently to other community events, maybe council meetings or open forums, or look at who's leading the civic affairs committee at local churches. These are the community members who are usually respected, have sizable network, and they can get the word out to community members about your survey. It's important and ultimately helps to establish trust with the community and improve targeted. So this is crucial, and this was crucial for our success. Survey helped us to reach members of high needs communities and those who were least likely to respond to general announcements. Third, we learned some unexpected lessons about why certain members are likely to engage and why others don't. There are typically reasons that we are aware of, things like multiple jobs, having to take care of families, literacy challenges, and so on. But there are also things like being able to keep up with your eyewear prescription, having a smartphone, but one that's simply not. We had members to come to workshops that were eager to fill out surveys, were capable of understanding very well, simply could not afford the eyewear subscription. The surveys had to be administered. We had members that came with their smartphones that were GPS enabled, app enabled, but required updates. So we had to have staff members physically, manually update and download mobile. So some of the barriers for survey participants are not as simple as they would. The more we understand about the barriers, the better equipped we can be to encourage participation among high needs communities and collect better quality data for advancing, aligning transportation improvements with community. So in my research, I've become keenly aware of the importance of thinking about equity not as a project, but as a process. In most presentations you hear, for example, they'll discuss definitions of transportation planning, talk about equity measures. There's usually some confusion about equity versus equality. And you'll usually hear about this in reference to some transportation. New bus route, perhaps one service, so on. But if you take nothing else from my talk this morning, you should remember to challenge yourself with a new way of thinking about work. It's about integrating equity fully into the transportation design, planning, decision-making, and operation. It's important to always be aware of engagement with communities and engagement not just for the sake of checking boxes, but actually to inform your design. If I didn't know, for example, in my project, if I didn't know that local travelers referred to the fixed bus service special, then I wouldn't have been able to estimate accurate mode share. It would have thrown our study off. Equity needs to be fully integrated into the planning form, everything. In my study, I also learned the importance of how we interpret travel data sets, understanding what our data. The reality is that the data provides records of observed travel choices, not necessarily travel preferences. The data simply tell us what people are doing. The challenge is that the data does not necessarily tell us what people want to do. Just because we observe that there are few people using a particular transit route doesn't mean that we don't have more people who want. Just because we observe few bikers using a particular road does not mean that we don't have more who like it. The reality that we have to recognize is that they are making choices under constraints. And these constraints are not necessarily reflected in the data. So this is a word of caution that we should be asking ourselves how to capture travel preferences, not just choices. And we also need to be aware of how to use these public data sets to guide our planning. For example, we might decommission a route because of underutilization without considerations for the constraints that lead to underutilization. The removal of this route might actually worsen. Finally, advancing equity is not so much about compiling a list of projects that will advance equity. And to be fair, if you are doing this, this is a positive thing. But the most important aspect is aligning transportation improvements with the needs of vulnerable communities. How to advance equity in one way for one particular town may be completely different from how equity should be advanced in another. But I believe that if we are focusing on aligning appropriate improvements with the needs, with this understanding of what the needs are, this is going to move us in the right direction. So this brings me to my summary from my talk this morning. One, in order for us to advance equity, it's critical to start with a working understanding and definition that considers pre-existing conditions, as well as the effects of new transportation improvements on vulnerable communities. Our goal is to move from where we are right now to a more equitable state. Second, we should continue to improve on our community-based data collection and engagement strategies. There are invaluable amounts of information on transportation planning and decision-making and mitigating harmful errors that we can learn from community members. Third, we should reflect on our data, what it's telling us about travel conditions, and to be sure to distinguish between what are travel choices and what are the actual preferences. 4, we should challenge ourselves and our teams to work and think differently about equity. Equity work is not a series of projects where we can define some measures, identify groups, calculate the measures, and select the project that will provide the greatest benefit. Now, don't get me wrong, if you're doing this, that is amazing. However, I think that the important thing is that it's less about completing the project and more about integrating equity into the decision-making, planning, design, operations, and other phases. And 5, rather than seeking a list of improvements that may support equity, seek to align appropriate improvements with the needs of vulnerable communities. So this brings me to my close. I want to remind you that we're at a critical point in time where transportation equity is more important than ever. I think most of us are aware of the state of income inequality in this country. As of 2020, income inequality for the richest 0.1% was 196 times that of the bottom 90%. This is according to the New York Times. Further, income inequality has been tied to slow economic growth and slowing of economic or dampening of economic resilience. So while equity is about fairness and about improving quality of life among society, it's also about the strength and resilience and health of our economy. So thank you for listening. Thank you for all of the great work that you're doing, and thank you for having me this morning. Sure.
Okay, are we live? Oh, sorry, keep forgetting to take the mask off. There we go, good morning. So Tara, thank you. That was very, very insightful. I took a ton of notes. I really appreciate it. Again, this afternoon, we'll have time for just a couple quick questions from the audience. But then this afternoon, again, in an unconference session, I will be facilitating your questions and my questions, and Tiara has agreed to be one of the very first ones at 1 o'clock. So any questions from the audience? Or any comments? Okay, there's one.
Thanks. Thank you. I was especially interested in the part about when you found out, when you basically pre-surveyed, the beta survey, when you found out what the lingo was and what they referred to things, it opens up a whole new list of questions probably, or ways to ask them. How do you how do you start that? How do you include that as part of a passenger survey or a neighborhood survey? It's not part of most surveys. You just come up with the questions and you ask them and you can get the data, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, this is something that I try to do in particular in my work, because I know how sometimes we as analysts, we can get things wrong, right? And so essentially what we did, because we had partnered already with, for example, the career services provider in Benton Harbor, we partnered with the transit operator. And so, they were helpful in us identifying, say, the first 10 people who could take the survey, right? So we took 10 people, we sat them down, they took the survey, and based on their responses and their feedback, we got so much information about how we could update the survey to make it more clear, to make sure that the language was, something that people were familiar with, and so that when they're answering questions, we are sure that they're answering it we're answering the questions with the same understanding, right? So it doesn't have to be very intensive. It could just be a handful of people, but it always ends up being super valuable.
Okay, another question? Marilyn?
I was curious. You were talking about how you had the community workshops and the focus groups, and you got the community to come there once you'd validated the study. You know, our problem is always getting them to come there. I mean, getting them to actually, I mean, we've tried free bus passes, we've done giveaway items, you know, hey, if you come, you get a free food box. There's just not that level of engagement. So how did you get over that hurdle?
Right, and to be fair, you know, these are things that we're still learning. It's an ongoing study. However, one of the most helpful things was identifying those community advocates. They were the ones that went around to people and say, hey, have you heard about this? Here's the flyer. Have you heard about, did you hear the announcement on the radio show? And they were ultimately the ones that brought in, you know, 100 or so people, right, into our workshops. And so I firmly stand by this idea of leveraging community advocates. These are people who, you know, they have a vested interest in the success of the project. They might be local religious leaders or people who work on committees at churches, people who are generally active but have access to large networks. So I really believe that this can be a powerful component to community-based engagement.
Kind of a follow-up question to that. What is the role of trust in all of that?
So I think that many of us have grappled with this, where you're trying to engage a community, but there's hesitancy, and there are barriers, and then there are also hesitancies because of various reasons. So in Benton Harbor, it was the case that many other teams of researchers had come into the community and done different types of surveys, and there's very little sort of management of expectations. And community members, they tend to be, you know, survey fatigued, and they tend to begin to resent any new effort that comes in because of sort of past harms. And so it is something very challenging to deal with, and I can't sit here and say that I have all of the answers. But, you know, so having agents that sort of try to do some of that work for us was a huge thing. Having local leaders, at one point we had a recording from the mayor that we played at the workshop, and we had recordings from city council members. So we tried to do everything that we could to build some credibility, and also we paid close attention to managing of expectations. A lot of times with new projects, there's an expectation for immediate benefits. And you know, we have to the extent that we can, use language to say, hey, you may not see these benefits, you know, in the short term, but, you know, this is how we expect for this to play out. So again, I think to the extent that you can, managing those expectations, being aware that there's probably going to be some survey fatigue. You know, incentives help, but at the same time, you can't necessarily compensate people for their time, right? And so, yeah, I mean, these are still questions that we're grappling with ourselves. So.
Any other questions? I have one more, but I want to give the audience, if they have one more question.
This isn't really a question. It's just you made a point that really resonated with me, and I want to make sure everybody in the room heard that, was when you said, are you understanding truly the equity impacts when you make service changes and perhaps cut an underutilized run? Do you understand why it's underutilized before you go cut it? I thought that was a very powerful statement in terms of equity.
Okay, one more question, anybody? Okay, so I have one question. Excuse me. So we understand that a credible actor is a key piece of, and in the understanding what leads to equity, so that you understand from their perspective, not your perspective, what equity means. So do you ever consider any other engagement methods apart from surveys to understand what equity would mean?
So for the studies that I engage in, we're typically trying to collect data that is comparable to a larger scale household travel survey. And this is because we're trying to estimate these statistical models that help for us to understand the relationship between people's conditions and the outcomes, the travel outcomes. So that usually requires those larger data sets. And so we collect small ones, we fuse them together, and we use them for model estimation. However, you know, I am aware that there are other qualitative approaches that are tremendously important in understanding what the needs are, understanding how, you know, certain improvements might improve equity. And in the project that I referenced, I'm one of the principal investigators, but they're also co-investigators. One of which is using things like community forums, and during COVID, he had some strategies for online workshops. He compiled a long list of community stakeholders, which is one of the approaches you just referenced. But he's done a mixture of forums, focus groups, and these expert interviews with community stakeholders.
Okay. So I think that's all for questions. Again, Tiara will be around at 1 o'clock to kind of help seed our discussion a bit further. Tiara, Dr. Bellis, thank you so very much. I appreciate it. If we could have our Virginia panel come on up.
Go forward? Yep, that's forward and that's backwards. Great. They should put it right knee. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Hello. It's great to see you here this morning. I see some very familiar faces from Virginia out there. I'm so glad to see you here, as well as everyone else. We are with the Virginia Association of Mobility Managers. I'm a member. My name is Chris Blankenship. I'm a mobility manager with the New River Valley Senior Services, which is in the New River Valley region of Virginia. If you've heard of Virginia Tech or Radford University, that's the area that I kind of work with. So primarily our panel today is with the Virginia Association of Mobility Managers, and we also have a member from DRPT here, Brittany Vall. She's also on the panel as well. We'd like to thank the National Center of Mobility Management for allowing us to share with you what we have been doing right here in the Commonwealth. More importantly, with our Virginia Association of Mobility Managers, let me flip over. We have our mission statement. I'm not going to read it to you, and our 5 C's. But the main thing I'd like to mention with our association, we communicate with each other to strengthen our knowledge of programming, building and collaborating with partnerships, and we offer support to one another as we face most of the same struggles that you here in this room do. I'm thrilled that you are here this morning, and I am confident that you will find these presentations very intriguing, and the topics will hold your interest, how we are here in the Commonwealth handling some of the innovative approaches to programming. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. We have Brittany Vall and Catherine Newman, who will be presenting Transportation Navigator, and Dawn Misery will do mobility services for us today. Brittany Vall is a DRPT Transit Programs Manager. She oversees the Federal Transit Administration Section 5310 and senior transportation programs for the Commonwealth of Virginia. including developing and maintaining Virginia's Coordinated Human Services Mobility Plan. Catherine Newman is a mobility manager and also a VAM leader and member. Catherine currently manages the Bay Transit New Freedom Mobility Management and MedCarry volunteer transportation programs. These services offer transportation to the Northern Neck and Middle Peninsula, seniors and individuals with disability, and public transportation that they cannot accommodate. She also works closely with Bay Transit operations staff to assist in mobility operations for riders and technical support. Dawn Misery at Chesterfield County. She served on the board of Community Transportation Association of Virginia, which is CTAA, to include serving as vice president. Dawn is currently serving as transportation representative on the Virginia Board for People with Disabilities, and currently she was the mobility manager in Chesterfield County. I encourage each of you to go to the app for CTAA for this session to look at their complete bios, because they've really accomplished a whole lot. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Brittany Vall and Catherine Newman to present to you the Transportation Navigator programming. If you want.
Is that better? Okay, talk right into it. So I'm Brittany Vole. I'm a transit program manager at the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation. I realize I probably should have put in a slide just to give a little background about DRPT. In Virginia, DRPT is basically like the DOT that's responsible for administering federal public transportation and special transportation funds. And I, like Chris said, work specifically with the Section 5310 program and a state-funded senior transportation grant. So back in 2018, 2019, DRPT started working on updating its Coordinated Human Services Mobility Plan. And we went through a very extensive outreach process as part of that update and involved VAM along the way. And they were key supporters of that process and provided a lot of great feedback and information. And one of the things that they asked for to support them in their mobility management work was a place where a person could go and find all transportation information in the Commonwealth. So we decided to incorporate that in the Chisholm process, and our consultant started working on developing a GIS map showing all the transportation resources. So I came to DRPT in 2018 without a real background in transportation. I worked at a human service agency that provided transportation, but I didn't know GIS. I'd never seen it before this project. And when the consultant came to us in 2019 with this map developed, we realized two things. One, GIS is not necessarily user-friendly to people who don't know how to use it. And two, there's probably a broader application for something like this than just the mobility managers. So while this would certainly alleviate some work from them, where they wouldn't have to develop resource listings in their area anymore, we would be doing that for them. There probably were people in the public that wanted to know where they could find transportation and what they needed to do to access it, if they were even eligible for it, how much it costed, things like that. So around that time, we kind of decided to put a pause on the GIS map, and then the FTA came out with its Mobility for All pilot program. And that was aimed at supporting innovative coordination strategies to enhance mobility and access to services for older adults, people with disabilities, and people of low income. So the people that our mobility managers were already working with. So we submitted an application, and it was for a two-part project. The first was to develop a stage one call, one click system that would be in partnership with an existing nonprofit here in Virginia called Virginia Navigator. They were already working with other state agencies and local partners, and we were able to leverage the structure of their existing site and do less work to create a really powerful tool. They have a family of sites, so Virginia Navigator is the parent site, and then there's Disability Navigator, Senior Navigator, and Veterans Navigator that provide resources specific to those populations. So we set about working on developing new transportation pages, making sure that the transportation resources on the site were accurate and up to date. There are over 1,000 resources on there today, and they are all accurate as of now. And we also started developing a widget that could be posted on DRPT's website and any partner website where somebody might go looking for transportation. The second part of the project was to develop GTFS feeds, General Transit Feed specifications, for rural transit agencies in Virginia that didn't have the resources to either develop them or update them on their own. So we worked with 13 rural fixed route public transit agencies to develop those feeds. We published a GTFS clearinghouse where all of the GTFS feeds for the Commonwealth are hosted, and we pushed out all of the updated information to Google Maps. So on the Virginia Navigator side, where people go looking for transportation, if there is a public transit resource, then it links to Google Maps. So somebody can go a step further and actually plan their route on public transit. Over the next couple of slides, I'm just gonna show what our resources look like, and I'm using the Senior Navigator pages as an example. So if you go to seniornavigator.org, this is what the homepage looks like, and this is what you would see if you hover over the new transportation page. So there's 3 options that you can choose from to dig a little bit deeper into transportation. And if you click onto the main transportation page, then this is what you would see. There's a set list of transportation types that we worked with Virginia Navigator to put on the page, because there's a lot of different terms for transportation, and we thought, what are those key types that people might go looking for, like public transit, a ride app service like Uber or Lyft, or here in Richmond we have Userve, things like that. We also developed a glossary because we realized people might not know transit terms. But we did think that it was important to use the transit terms, because if somebody went looking for a resource here on Virginia Navigator and then went to a specific provider's site, they'd likely be confronted with those terms. So that's one of the first things that's linked. And then under that is a link to the widget if somebody wanted to go and search for a specific transportation type. And then below that at the bottom left are all of the transportation types that we wanted to provide up front. So if somebody were to click into one of those, like public transit as an example, they would get a listing of all of the public transit resources in Virginia. And from there, they could filter by city, county, or zip code. They could go to read articles that are relevant, find books and guides, or helpful links. So if somebody were to filter by location, like let's say Richmond, then they would be able to filter even further. So this option lets people search by low cost, free service, and actual place of service. So there's an option up here that says serving my city or county. So when, let's say somebody filters by Richmond, they're gonna find all providers that serve Richmond but might not be located here. So if somebody wants a provider that's actually located in Richmond and serves Richmond, they could then filter out those ones that are located in other localities or perhaps providing services across the state. And then where it gets really cool that we leverage the existing structure of Virginia Navigator is this direct connect feature. So in Virginia, our area agencies on aging are under the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services. That's one of Virginia Navigator's main partners. So if somebody is on here looking for transportation and there's an area agency on aging that provides it, which a lot of them do in Virginia, they can choose to send their personal information directly to the area agency on aging to have them contacted about scheduling a ride. So they don't have to go to another website, they don't have to call a phone number. They can just, like I said, send that information straight over there, and then somebody from the receiving end will contact them to help them with what they need. This is a snapshot of what our widget looks like. Again, we had a set list of transportation services that we wanted listed. The other drop-down for city or county lists every locality in Virginia, so you can filter by where you actually need the transportation service. I mentioned that this is available on the new transportation pages we created. It's also hosted on the DRPT website. We also have a statewide consortium. We put this out to our state partners and local and regional partners to develop widgets to post on their sites. And actually this morning, I got them all emailed to me, so I'll be sending those out to partners very shortly. And anybody else that's in Virginia that thinks they might be able to help connect people with transportation can also put this on their site. All they need to do is send me an email and say, hey, we want that too. Just to talk about the GTFS side, in case people aren't familiar, I mentioned we worked with rural agencies. I used Richmond as an example. This is not a group that we worked with, but I thought since we're here in Richmond, let's look at Richmond. So in this case, let's say I want to leave here and go get a pizza. And I'm going to go right after I finish talking. So I look up how to get from here to a pizza place. And I'm shown that I can take the BRT if I run out just before 10, and then I can be there ordering a pizza by about 10:15. If I click onto that, here's the actual route I need to take, where I need to walk to pick up the bus, what bus I need to get on, where it's going to drop me off, and then where I need to walk to finish and get to that pizza place destination. So even though I kind of want to go now, if I want to go later, that second blue link in the top third for schedule, I can explore the schedule and see what other routes are going to pick me up somewhere near here and find one that fits better with my timing. So in this case, it's showing everything that's happening around noon. And just to reiterate, this is the same information that's available for all rural transit agencies, most of the urban transit agencies, and it's linked in Virginia Navigator. So if somebody goes on there and finds a public transit resource, they'll be able to go into Google Maps and plan their route from there. So I'm going to hand it over to Catherine, and she'll talk about application.
Good morning. Welcome to Virginia, first and foremost. So what is mobility management? It's everything but the kitchen sink. I think if you've been in it long enough, you do a little bit of everything. But we define it as a customer-focused approach to designing and delivering transportation services. Begins with the community vision. Customers, planners, and stakeholders work together with the entire community transportation network to include public transit, private operators, volunteer drivers, just to name a few. It encourages innovation and flexibility to help find the best solution for the rider. What works for one's not going to work for, may not work for another. It plans for sustainability, strives for easy information and referrals to assist customers in learning about and using the services available through travel training. It incorporates customer feedback as services are evaluated and adjusted. The term mobility management was introduced into the transit industry about, I think it was 2010. And since then, it's become a top focus for urban, small urban, and rural areas. In 2013, 4 of Virginia's mobility managers got together. We met here in Richmond to discuss ways that we could connect with other mobility managers throughout the Commonwealth, because we really didn't know what mobility managers were supposed to be doing and what others were doing. We were kind of trying to define ourselves and our services and programs. We really didn't have a lot of information to go off of. So the intention was to meet, discuss the services, responsibilities that we had, programs, partnerships, just ideas. So together with DRPT, we were able to form a group quickly. Everybody was starving for more information on mobility management. We meet quarterly. Since then, we've met quarterly, and we go throughout the entire Commonwealth. We would visit each other's home place, and we would discuss, they would present their program, and we would see how they do things in their office and be able to experience their services throughout their community. And it's worked really well. Even through COVID, we met through Zoom. We've met through Zoom for the last 2 years each quarter, still having guest speakers to come and present, and just to keep up with the different options and services that are going on throughout the state. We started off with 4, and last I checked, our email list was 24.
Yes.
So we have great partners in CTAV, which was discussed earlier, in DRPT, and CTAA, and NCMM. In 2016, we started identifying as the Virginia Association of Mobility Managers, better known as VAM. And since then, the group has participated in several national conferences. We partner with CTAA each year for their annual conference to offer a mobility management track. We've participated in NCMM's poster session 3 years, I believe, and we're participating again this year. And we've partnered with DRPT on the interactive mapping project and comprehension data collection and the 2019 statewide CHISM plan. And we're currently working with Brittany on the GTFS project. Mobility managers across Virginia manage and implement coordinated transportation services for veterans, low-income individuals, older adults, persons with disabilities, and individuals with transportation needs. This is the Vam Mission Statement, and these are some of the logos for the programs throughout the Commonwealth. Here are some of the examples of the different programs that we provide throughout the Commonwealth, just to name a few. And we're so excited about the GTFS product that Brittany and the DRPT team has worked so hard on. As many of you know, we often get well, I guess you would know. We often get calls from caretakers that live in other areas that call us and ask us about how, you know, their parent or their sibling or, you know, their family member can get around, or if they're moving to another area. And so right now, our network through VAM, we know where the mobility managers are located, and we can easily call them and ask them, and it's very helpful. But this GTFS project is going to make our lives so much easier. It increases efficiencies in transit planning for seniors and individuals with disabilities, in addition to more efficient technology. It provides the real-time data with Google Maps, which Brittany was just showing you with the schedules. Then we can, you know, physically look it up and tell them exactly what they need to do to get where they need to go. It provides a centralized and integrated center that will better position our statewide mobility management programs to meet the needs of the community and reach inaccessible areas, rural areas. It's a centralized option to assist with possible collaborations with other transit services. We're always trying to find providers to help us out. And with this one list, it's going to make our lives so much easier. Right now, we have to go out and just keep, depending on Google, word of mouth, and DMV. That's what we do. That's how we find providers. It will assist in identifying transportation providers for possible partnerships. It will also be a tool to overcome transit challenges when crossing areas or jurisdictions. So we can go and look at, you know, the next county over, if there are any options in that county. How can we meet? How could we, you know, become a feeder service for a larger urban area if we're in a rural area? And it empowers individuals to research Virginia's transit options. That's the first and foremost of the project. We're extremely excited about it and can't wait to get it implemented on our website. So like Brittany said, if you're from Virginia and you want to add it, please make sure you shoot her an email. And here's our contact information. And now Dawn, Missouri is going to talk about her award-winning program out of Chesterfield.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Great. Good morning, and thank you all for inviting me here today. Chesterfield County was honored to be the recipient of the 2020 Best Large County Achievement Award for our Access on Demand service. Chesterfield County, in case you didn't know, is about 437 square miles just south of the James River here in Richmond area. As I go through the presentation, you're going to hear about the many departments within the county, as well as our business partners that helped this project become successful. And our thanks go out to all those who contributed in this award. So just a bit of history about Chesterfield County. Access Chesterfield, which was is our shared ride service. Thank you. I can't do two things at once. So Access Chesterfield, which is our shared ride service, started in 2004, serving citizens who are 60 and older, people with disabilities, or people living in low-income households. The map on this slide shows you our service area. Originally, Access Chesterfield provided service to anywhere in Chesterfield County. In addition, we did medical, employment, were also provided to the gray areas. So you can see Chesterfield County is that white area, how big we were. When we first started in 2004, we expanded all the way into the gray areas, which includes Henrico, Petersburg, Colonial Heights, Hopewell, City of Richmond, as well as parts of Fort Lee, and a little bit of Prince George County. So we also allowed people who are living in the southern parts of the county to go for personal trips into Petersburg because it was cost effective. In July of 2014, due to increased costs and smaller budgets, services had to be cut. We cut our services from door to door to curb to curb. Our employment trips had to be limited to just in Chesterfield County, except for people with disabilities. So you can imagine the impact when we have to call 90 people and tell them we can no longer take them out of Chesterfield County. That service is still in operation. We use vouchers to pay for one-way trips. Vouchers can be purchased through the mail, at any county library, or at the treasurer's office. Reservations have to be made by 2 p.m. of the day before, with no reservations being taken all week. Cancellations must be no less than 2 hours before in order for a trip to not be considered late or no-show. So in October of 2017, Chesterfield County hired a mobility manager to investigate alternative transportation options. As I said, Chesterfield County is a suburb of Richmond. At that time, lacked the population density and the infrastructure to support traditional transit modes, with a population of about 344,000 in 2017. But there was an immediate need. Chesterfield County Police Department, along with others in the region, began noticing a sharp increase in the number of overdoses from opioids. Several county departments such as police, sheriff, fire EMS, mental health, and the health department, along with private coalitions such as SAFE, had joined together to access and evaluate frequent causes, preferred treatments, and sanctions for opioid-addicted individuals. Transportation was and is a chronic barrier for individuals needing care. So in December of 2017, Mental Health Support Services was awarded a federal grant for opioid treatment by the Virginia Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Services. When they applied for the grant, they identified transportation as one of the barriers. So in February of 2018, Chesterfield Community Service Board partnered with Goodwill of Central Virginia and Coastal Virginia. Goodwill of Central Virginia and Coastal Virginia knew that transportation was one of the major barriers to skill attainment and employment, so that their leadership recognized that testing a point-to-point service for a specific population had many implications that would translate to their job seekers. So using an Uber for Business app, Goodwill began to do the administration of a pilot program for up to 20 people seeking transportation to methadone treatment. Many of the participants did not have credit cards, smartphones, or discretionary funds. So basically, Goodwill served as the reservation network. You call in to make your, schedule your appointment to treatment, and they would work through the Uber for Business app to schedule those appointments. In March and April of 2018, 163 trips were completed at a cost of $25.81, or roughly 50% less than what it was costing the CSB's substance abuse service for its in-house transportation. In May of 2018, substance abuse services transportation transitioned to the pilot as well. So they took all of their substance abuse folks and went on the Uber Goodwill pilot. But Goodwill of Central Virginia never wanted to go into the business of transportation. So building on the success of the Goodwill Uber pilot, in September of 2018, Chesterfield County issued an RFP for access on demand, seeking qualified companies to who have experience providing point-to-point transportation for the Access on Demand program. Mobility Services and Chesterfield Colonial Heights Department of Social Services both vested in. Because the Department of Social Services also served Colonial Heights, 2 separate contracts were awarded. We reserve the right to award contracts to multiple providers. The service area is similar to Access Chesterfield's, but includes 2 major improvements. Employment trips to anywhere in the service area 24/7. So we provide the ability for people to once again work outside of Chesterfield County. And it makes arrangements for transportation for people who need to work 3rd shift, and it provided transportation on weekends. It also provided medical trips to anywhere in the service area 24/7, making trips to urgent care centers and non-emergency hospital trips an option, transportation home from hospital no matter what the hour, and longer hours of operation for dialysis treatment. Upon completion of the RFP process, Mobility Services selected 4 vendors, each offering a different transportation niche. So for example, the first one, Dependicare, was a company-owned, marked vehicles, except cash, which was not part of our contract, their vehicles clearly marked. Owl Inc. Also had marked vehicles, hired their own drivers. In addition, we have Ride Roundtrip, which was a reservation network company who used Uber and Lyft, providing some autonomy for those people with disabilities who don't want to have a big vehicle marked, I'm handicapped. And then, of course, Userve, which is a combination of both, using quality drivers who offer that door-to-door service, but more similar to an Uber-type service. So on March 28, 2019, we hosted 4 meet and greet sessions where we invited all of our active riders to see a brief presentation by each vendor and then allowed attendees time to visit with each vendor at their table. On April 1st, 2019, we had a soft launch for all of our active riders, and then on May 1st, we opened launch and opened it up to all qualified citizens. This just shows you a little bit about the difference in cost savings. So our Access Chesterfield, which was at that time costing us about $26.66 per trip, and the Access on Demand was costing $23.93. What I didn't tell you was this service at the time was fully funded by Chesterfield County. The number of Access Chesterfield trips decreased by 38% with people changing over to the new Access on Demand service. And we saw a 22% increase in trips with the 2 services provided. Our registration was up by 25% in 2019. So as you can see from the tweet above, our customers were extremely happy with the service. We were again meeting the needs of our citizens who needed door-to-door assistance, as well as citizens who had jobs outside the county. In addition, all of our customers had the freedom of choice. Use the vendors where the driver is employed by the company and the van pulls up with the company logo, or have an Uber Lyft driver take you to work and not stand out as someone with a disability. We have a very happy experience to share. We were very happy to share our experience with Hanover County and support them in the creation of Hanover Dash. This tweet that was on here really gives you the reason why we all do what we do. This lady had been trying to get her mother to be able to come to Thanksgiving dinner and has hired private providers, and sure enough, on Thanksgiving Day, they wouldn't show up. And while our service didn't provide service on Thanksgiving to take people on personal trips, our vendors were so invested that when they got the call to take somebody's mother from the nursing home to their family for Thanksgiving dinner, they were there. And so this hits the heart. So that's kind of all I had about us, and that is our contact information. Just FYI, in October, I retired from Chesterfield County for the second time. So I had committed to doing this. I'm here, but if you're interested, there is a mobility manager position in Chesterfield County.
Thank you. Well, thank you, each of you, for sharing. Now we're going to open it up to questions, and I know you're going to have a lot of questions for each of them on the services and the innovative approaches that they've done to be able to serve the Commonwealth. Do we have some questions?
So I apologize if I misunderstood this or missed it. So Access Chesterfield ran during regular hours and the demand program was the off hours, or did they run simultaneous?
They both run simultaneous.
Hi. In Ohio, we're moving towards regionalizing mobility managers. Are you doing that? Are you looking at that in Virginia? We've got 2 pilots in Ohio, one on the eastern side of the state, one on the western side of the state, and ultimately the goal is to have 10 regions. Is that something that Virginia is looking at?
Which panelists are you directing your question to? Open, okay.
From a state perspective, we don't have any parameters about where a mobility management program needs to operate. So if, I mean, not to put it back on VAM, but if they got together and said, hey, we could maybe consolidate our resources and do something like that, we'd certainly support them in that, but I don't think we're at a point where we would tell them they had to. I will say, for our Chisholm plan, we previously had 23 different plans for the state because we had it broken down by planning district commission region. And we did make a change in the last update, the 2019 update, to align with the Medicaid regions of the state. So we now consider there to be 6 regions in Virginia. But within those regions, I think there's so much diversity in terms of the population and the geography and the challenges that it would be really hard to put mobility managers in those regions. So I think if we ever did take an approach like that, we would re-region the state again.
And to be honest, we don't have, not every part of Virginia has a mobility manager. And we have an interactive map through VAM that kind of shows where our mobility managers are. So let's just say, for example, someone calls from a county that doesn't have a mobility manager. We just look at the neighboring mobility manager so that everyone is covered. Like we do try to help every person, and we are pretty knowledgeable about the region or the areas around us too, if that makes sense. So I think that regionally, and I've even heard of states having, statewide mobility managers. So let us know how that goes. You've got our contact information. We'd be interested to see.
Oh, okay. This is for Dawn, sorry. I'm wondering if you can speak a bit more about your performance measures for this project. Nice to see the cost per trip, but did you have other performance measures? Really fascinated the fact that the county is paying for all this and how you evaluate it and make sure that it can be sustained. Thanks.
I don't have a lot of that information with me. As I said, I retired last month. Our main performance measure was truly just making sure we got our citizens started. So, the service started in April of 2000, or May, full blown in 2019, and then COVID hit. So, in March of 2020, we really started tracking what was going on with ridership dropping and trying to make sure we were serving those people with dialysis trips and still doing that kind of thing. So unfortunately, our performance measures were the growth of the service. You know, as I said, we had 25% increase in the number of people using the combined services. So ours was just following the numbers. Were we serving more Chesterfield County citizens?
I apologize, I have several thousand questions. First off, related to an earlier question, what is DRPT's role, and what was the role in starting the VAMs, and what is their kind of ongoing role with VAM?
Truly, it was the mobility managers that got together to form a group of like-minded, I guess, or to just kind of like what Dawn did today, sharing her program, information, performance measures, how she approached it, what worked, what didn't work. And we just wanted to know what other mobility managers were doing. What were we supposed to be doing? Because really, truly, at the time, we didn't know. It was so new to the industry. So we reached out to DRPT because it started off with just 4 of us, one from Richmond, one from Fredericksburg, myself, and then one from Culpeper. So we were kind of all neighboring areas. And so we got together, we met, we talked about what is it that we want? What would we want to do? What would it look like? Who would we want to join us? Who would we want to partner with? What would our approach be? What do we want to learn more about? I mean, these are just the things we just brainstormed. And so then we reached out to DRPT. When we reached out to, at the time, it wasn't Brittany, but it was the person in Brittany's position. And we said, this is what we want to do. You know, can you help us? We need a list of mobility managers. We need their contact information. Would you support us meeting quarterly to discuss these things? We told them about our vision. We told them what we wanted, what we, would like it to look like. And they agreed, and we've been partnering with them ever since.
Are they giving you money?
I'm sorry?
Are they giving you financial, is the state of Virginia giving the mobility managers like a state allocation?
Just through grants, just through the 5310 grants.
All right.
Yeah. They support our meetings when we did travel. If we had an agenda that had a guest speaker, or we were going, to another area of the state, we could get RTAP for that training. They were very supportive of that, very supportive of our mobility management track at the CTAB Expo, which is, the Community Transportation Association of Virginia. So, as you know, you don't have to be a mobility manager to manage mobility. It's so many people in the industry, so many positions: transit director, operations manager, supervisor. We're all kind of managers. So we've picked up a lot of people along the way.
Some out of state as well.
Yes, and we also have some from out of state. West Virginia and North Carolina have joined our group, and so yeah.
Another thing that DRPT does to help support us is just give us an update of what's going on at the state office.
Yes.
And, really keep us informed of meetings, presentations, webinars for training, and they encourage us to get, advanced training, come to our conferences to just to be the best that we can be.
Also, before application time, Brittany will come on to a meeting and just to kind of be there to answer questions about any changes in the application. Outside of the statewide presentation that she does, she opens up to more information for our group. So I feel like we've made we have a great partnership with them, and I hope that they feel the same, because they do call upon us when it's something that they know that we can help them with, and we're always there,
I have a couple questions too. Well, post-it note. My first one's for Dawn. You were talking about your medical transportation and new hospital discharges. One of the things that we've always struggled with in our mobility programs is that liability issue of doing like an outpatient when they've been under anesthesia. So how do you handle the liability of those trips, and do you have limits on it? You know, it's been so many hours since you were under sedation. How are you dealing?
Well, most of those people, first of all, have to travel with somebody else. We're kind of no different than an Uber or Lyft. If you know they're called to show up, you really don't know. If somebody's being discharged from a hospital at 8 o'clock at night, we want them to have a way home. So our RFP does require that our vendors carry the liability.
All right. So we don't Uber and Lyft, so our vendors are all action agencies and things like that. They're not going to take that liability. So that's the hurdle that we're always on.
And one of the things that I didn't mention is that with the Goodwill Uber pilot, Uber did the marketing to get the drivers in Chesterfield County. Even though, you know, we are south of Richmond, at that time, there was very few Ubers in the area. Gotcha. So they did the marketing and got the drivers down there.
All right, and then my other question is more about your software and your transportation navigators. So you mentioned something called Direct Connect, that it's a no wrong door. We're from Oklahoma, and they're doing a no wrong door program in Oklahoma as a statewide thing, and they're using a software called Unite Us. Is this just your branded version of that, or is this a software you developed here?
So that gets into an area actually where I don't have a lot of information. I'm sorry. That feature within Virginia Navigator is managed through the Department for Aging and Rehabilitative Services, and so we were able to leverage that in our project, but it's developed by them, managed by them. I actually have a meeting with them on Friday to learn more about it. So
well, good, because I'm going to give you my business card so you can call me and tell me what you find out. Because I also wanted to know, how are you updating and keeping all that information on that Navigator accurate? Because we tried it in Oklahoma, and that was the hurdle, getting people to update their stuff.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we've had conversations about, and for this project, Virginia Navigator staff did all of the updating. So from a combination of Google searches, making phone calls, I put out a call to all the mobility managers, all of our public transit agencies, anybody that was getting funding through DRPT, we made sure that we had their data accurate, and then kind of left it to Virginia Navigator to do everybody else. But now we're looking at how we're going to maintain that going forward. And so their proposal to us was a two-part effort. So one, their staff updates for those that can't, won't, whatever the case may be. And the other is that they would do a series of email pushes and kind of training to providers to take control of their own listings and update them. Because there's some that may want to do that and some that may not have the capacity.
And my last question is, you did the mobility on the, how are you sustaining the funding for the Transportation Navigator? And what's the next step after this? Do you have one?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the initial part, first part of the project that we've launched, now we launched it on October 27th, so we're kind of calling this first phase done. That was funded through the Mobility for All grant through the FTA and USDOT. For maintenance, we're looking at a couple of different things. One, discretionary grants, and two, whether we just have funding within our state budget or like 5310 admin, you know, what are our options there if we don't get discretionary grant funding for it? And then in terms of next stages, we have a really great program here in Richmond at Virginia Commonwealth University. It's a master's program. I'm working with a team of MPA candidates right now on recommendations for where we should go with our next steps. So within, I think the next, it's like a little over a month, or a little under a month from now, on December 7th, they'll be delivering their final presentation to us. And I've been having conversations with them throughout the way. And we have another tool that we're using in Virginia called Agile Mile. I don't know if anybody's from Vermont or familiar with Go Vermont. That's what they use. So we've had some conversations about whether that would be a good platform, since we're already using it for commuter services, to kind of build that out as stage 2, possibly stage 3.
Okay, we have one more question.
Oh, I thought, sorry.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Kiles, and I'm a regional mobility manager from Mississippi. I have a, I guess, a two-part question, and if I missed it, I do apologize. So my first question is a more or less testing for understanding. Is VAM chartered as an organization? And with that, second question to that, well, that's a test for understanding. The second question is, if chartered, I'm interested in, I've heard about the software, how do fundraising happens, kind of / related to outreach, going back to our first presenter, I know this is heavy, and creating equity for ridership. Am I clear, or do I need to unpack that a little?
Yes, no, we are not chartered. We have talked about it over the years. We worked closely with Wisconsin Association of Mobility Managers, who is, and we've gone over it. We actually revisit it every year. And we've decided that we kind of like the way that it is set up now, where it's not as structured into an association chartered with all of the paperwork and documentation that you have to have. As we grow, that may change. So we individually do fundraising. We do not do it as an association or as a group. So far, that's where we are. But that is the intention when we do decide to move forward with chartering and making it a registered, I guess you could say, association. That would be why. It would be to do the fundraising, to apply for the grants and all of that. But as of right now, we just, I don't know if, I guess you could say we've just kind of been enjoying the way that it is.
Well, Catherine, can I mention?
Yes, absolutely.
Because we have a website, we really key into our strengths. So our members step forward and they offer their strengths. And we have someone that is in, where's Kristen from? Culpeper. From the Culpeper area, who developed the website. And as members, we made personal donations to keep this website up, because it's helping us to be more efficient and to stay connected. So it's more of just a professional membership. There's no membership dues, but when we do see a need, we will ask the members as a whole to, make a donation for the goal. So, is that the last question? Okay.
This is a question for Dawn. Somebody in the back asked this question, and I guess I didn't hear it. When I looked at your numbers, the Chesterfield County's given you over $1 million to do your program for the cost of the rides. Is that correct?
Yes.
So how is that program? Where are they getting that $1 million plus, and what is the plan for sustainability to keep that program going if you're getting county dollars?
Okay, the funds right now come from general funds, so that's county taxpayer dollars. I need to add that in the last 2 years, we have started receiving some funding from DRPT for the 5310 program. Chesterfield County just feels very strongly about assuring that their elderly, low-income, and disabled population has transportation. So they have made that funding their priority.
Okay, can we give a round of applause, please, to our panel?
Thank you. I'd like to mention too that if you have any more questions about the Association of VAM, you can come by our poster session. We're going to be manning that table. So.
Okay, and are you guys doing any of the unconference sessions, or have you decided?
We are.
So you'll be able to learn more about the programs there. So I am pleased that we have 34 people on our live stream, and I want to remind them that if they have questions, to put them in the chat box, and then we'll feed them into discussion. We're gonna take a 10-minute break. And the restrooms are kind of under the escalators. So we'll be back here at 10:25 sharp. Thanks so much. Just a oh, sorry. Gee, that's loud. Just a reminder, if you want to sponsor a session at the Unconference, now's the time to go over and write your name of your session and put it up on the board like those two. And also, if you have a badge, that's your ticket to lunch, as long as you have a badge. If you don't have a badge, come see me. You have a badge. You're good. That's all you need. Yeah, hi.
I'm not scheduled to be here for the afternoon. I put
You're
in
more than
schedule
welcome
for
to
DOT.
stay. Oh, I'm sorry, what was your question?
I'm scheduled to be at the round.
Lost my crowd last time. Yeah, so you guys are in the right one. Okay, am I live? I'll start these. Can we make the podium mic live, please? All right, there we go. So we're going to start again. In case you did not get my announcement during break, people on live stream, please send in your questions by chat. People in the room, if you'd like to sponsor an unconference session, we've got 4 now. We need at least 5 more. I'd like to have a few more than that. So please, if there's, again, it can just be a discussion. Just be prepared to facilitate that. So go ahead and put an ID up there if you'd like. And lunch, all you need is your registration badge. There is no ticket for lunch. So as long as you have a badge, at about 11:45-ish, we will walk across the street for our opening lunch. And if you have any questions, let me know. Now we are going to turn to the 3 S's. We've got Stephen, Stephanie, and Stacy. Stephen was a grantee of NCMM's. Stephanie is a project that CTAA has been working with, and Stacy was also one of our grantees. We figured it was just about time that we let them speak. So I'm very excited, 3 very innovative projects, so I'm very excited to have them speak. So Stephen, off you go.
Hey everyone. Hi, how's everyone doing? My name's Steve DaCosta. I'm a transportation planner at Greater Mercer TMA. We're a transportation management association based out of New Jersey. I'm going to talk to you today about a program we're working on for the past 2 years, I think. It went live in August, but it's been in development for about 2 years, called Pickup, and it uses the Waze Carpool app.
Green? Yeah. Does it work?
It's not working.
Big green button?
He's trying.
I'm vigorously pressing it. There we go. Too vigorously. Okay. So we used, the human design thinking for this project, and we kind of came up with this problem statement of how do you get underserved workers in Trenton and Hightstown to warehouses jobs in East Windsor and Cranberry. And I have a map on the next slide for those of you not familiar with Mercer County, New Jersey. But this is an area that kind of lacks a lot of public transportation. There's one route that runs through the warehouse district, but the warehouse district is very sprawling, so it can't really fully provide service to the whole area. And also, warehouses typically their shift times are typically not 9 to 5. They're all over the place really, so it's kind of hard to serve, especially with a route that has limited funds. The group that we're serving, they're limited income, and the jobs that they're going to get to are relatively low-wage jobs. The jobs are located miles away. Even if they could walk or bike, the area itself doesn't have a lot of pedestrian infrastructure, so it's not very safe, and there's a lot of big trucks driving by, so it really feels unsafe. And employers need workers, and workers need jobs. It was interesting when we first started this project. It was mainly about getting the workers to these jobs, but since the pandemic happened, there's this worker crisis, and now the employers really need jobs, and they're realizing that transportation is a serious barrier for them for getting enough workers. And lastly, the current private options are unreliable and expensive. Sometimes workers take Lyft and Uber every day, and those prices have exploded. So these are already low-income jobs. It gets even harder for people when they're paying so much money for transportation. So these are the maps that I promised. There's Mercer County on the left. In the green highlights, those are kind of our main target areas: Trenton, East Windsor, and Hightstown. The program itself serves all of Mercer County, but these are the areas really where there are workers coming that are actually going to this warehouse district. Trenton specifically, which is 17 miles away, is where most of the workers are coming from. And there's the warehouse district. It's about 5 miles long, 2 miles across. The map on the right there kind of shows the transit route that serves it. That's a half-mile buffer as the crow flies, so it's a very generous buffer. And as you can see, it doesn't really cover the entire district. So the solution we came up with after iterating on a bunch of different solutions was using an existing app called the Waze Carpool app. It's a peer-to-peer carpooling app that kind of connects existing drivers and riders who are going to similar locations. We had subsidies to that, so every rider just has to pay $1 per ride, so $2 a day if you're going there and back. We added driver incentives to the app, so drivers can make the most amount of money possible on the app. That's another good thing about this program, is that the money that we spend on rides actually goes to some of these other low-income workers who have vehicles. Someone coming from Trenton, driving someone from Trenton can make $8 one way, so it's potentially $16 a day, so it's a pretty good deal. And the whole thing is geofenced so that only workers in Mercer County going to the warehouse district can qualify for this subsidy. Just to give you a quick background on the Waze app, because many of you might be familiar with the Waze Navigation app on the left there. Waze Carpool is an app they created in addition to this a couple years ago that connects people who are already traveling in the same direction. So you can sign up as a rider or a driver, you plug in your schedule, your home destination, your work destination, and then it kind of connects people together. And all payments handled within the app. When they first created this app, it was kind of more like a time-saving thing, and it was more geared toward like tech workers. But we kind of wanted to revamp and use it as more of a tool, like a de facto transportation service, where the idea was we would get as many drivers already driving to the warehouses as possible signed up on the app, And then once that happens, we can start promoting it to the community organizations and other people who don't have transportation. And then when they get these jobs, they can actually go on the app and then find rides with people who are already going to the warehouse district who could just also be their colleagues. So we worked with a lot of different partners in developing the project. You know, on the left there is our development partners, different planning organizations, transit organizations, employment organizations, and community organizations. The community organizations, I think, were especially helpful because they kind of had the finger on the pulse of our potential users in terms of what they would need in a transportation solution and what kind of things they would be looking for. And then our business partners. Anyone in the warehouse district can sign up and start using the app, but we really wanted to work with specific warehouses just so we can promote within the warehouse to really get the word out to maximize our marketing efforts. We have 2 currently, UPS and Wayfair, we're actively working with. And another business partner who I didn't put up there, but it's kind of obvious, is Waze Carpool. They've been a great partner for us. They've been working with us the entire time. And for them, this is kind of a pivot. Their current, like I said before, their old market was tech workers in San Francisco and other cities. Once the pandemic happened, those workers started working, remotely, and they haven't really come back. So they lost all of their users. So they're hoping to use this new model of using it for essential workers can kind of be their new route to getting users onto their platform. So it's kind of a win-win all around for everybody. And where we are now. So like I said, we launched back in August, and I would love to tell you that it's been a great success and all transportation problems have been solved in Mercer County, but unfortunately that has not been the case. We managed to get 25 people signed up into the app, but sadly, so far, no carpools have been given out yet. It's kind of been an uphill battle with the marketing. But I mean, we're still conducting outreach with our community partners. We've been tabling at community organizations. The picture on the left there shows us our tabling at the Latino Festival in Hightstown. A picture on the right is us tabling in the UPS warehouse. But like I said, people seem a little bit skeptical at signing up for the app. The app might be a little too complicated, but we're currently working with Waze right now to develop new marketing strategies to try to figure out how we can better get people signed up to it. So we're pushing forward, and we're going to kind of do a new soft relaunch soon to try and redouble our efforts in getting people signed up, because we do think it's a great solution. I know, I would say that all the academics and people are all excited about it. Everyone we talk to is excited. The warehouses themselves are excited, but just the users don't seem that excited by it so far. I'm going to go real quick in the lessons learned slide, but I think the most important thing that we learned was you should always test your new ideas out before you launch them. We had plans to do a limited launch with another warehouse partner. And we were going to do panels to see what people thought about the app and if they would use it and everything like that. A week before that was about to happen, lawyers got involved, which is never good, and they said that they didn't think it would be wise to promote a carpooling app during a pandemic, even though they wouldn't be liable, but they just were freaked out by it, so they pulled back. So we never really got to do that launch, which is unfortunate, because we would have probably learned a lot. And I know Waze is even kind of reconsidering how they can restructure their app so it works better with this group of workers rather than tech workers. But yeah, finish it.
Great, thank you.
That's
Okay,
my contact.
so we're going to move on to the 2 presentations, but we've structured their presentations to be short. So then we're going to have kind of a panel discussion after that, and we'll feed in your questions at that point. So if you could pass the mic, that would be great. And if you want to take it out of the stand, you're welcome to do that. Just give me the...
It's probably, I'm pretty loud, so is everybody hear me okay? All right, all right. Well, let's see. Am I up?
Just about. Hang on a second, he'll bring it up.
Okay. There they are. My name is Stephanie Davis. I am a mobility program coordinator for the City of Oklahoma City's Transportation and Parking Division. That is the really long way of saying embark. So if you hear the term embark, that's where I came from. It's no great secret that social service programs are fraught with all kinds of unique challenges, not the least of which of those, of course, is the availability of transportation. So thanks to a grant from the Arnall Family Foundation, we're seeking to overcome that barrier for parents who have children within DHS custody by developing an innovative program that combines groundbreaking software development for better data tracking, diverse transportation capabilities, and world-class mobility management services, we're hoping to improve the outcome of reunifying biological parents with their children throughout our communities. I proudly present to you the Climb Ride program. In April of 2015, Sue Ann Arnold, who is a native Oklahoman and philanthropist, signed a giving pledge expressing her intent to give away the vast majority of her wealth to finding solutions to things like child welfare, animal welfare, criminal justice reform issues, and part of her attention was focused on the Department of Human Services. It's here that she discovered that more than 1,000 parents at any given time are separated from their children in Oklahoma County alone. Most of which remain in the system for 18 months or more on average. That's a really long time for families to be separated. So this prompted her to ask the question, how can we improve reunification outcomes for families? A social services needs assessment done by the United Way of Central Oklahoma kind of answered that question. Remove the transportation barrier that parents face in trying to complete their court-ordered program requirements. The Arnold Family Foundation issued out a mission call to the transportation sector saying 4 years, $1 million, create a sustainable program model that adequately addresses the issue but could also be expanded to other underserved populations. So March 28, 2019, the challenge was accepted. Community Transportation Association of America, in partnership with Embark and the Oklahoma Transit Association, were chosen to receive what was called the Transportation Innovation Grant, and thus Climb Ride program was born. Well, let's see. How aggressively did you have to push this thing? All right. All right. At the very core, Climb Ride is a social services mobility program, but it's much more than that. Safe, reliable transportation is provided to our participants in the form of fixed route options via the Embark bus system and streetcar. There's taxi service, on-demand rideshare via contracted providers. But because of the specialized nature of what transit professionals do, we also developed a unique trauma training program that we launched and offered free of charge to those who desired a better understanding of the riders that they are encountering. In keeping with the idea of an all-inclusive program, we also provide travel training for those participants who are unfamiliar with public transportation options. In short, the participants are given the ability to maintain independence and dignity, all while accessing much-needed services. Transportation provided within the scope of this program is case-related and required by DHS courts as a part of their individualized service plans. So these things include trips like visitations with their children, personal or family counseling, domestic violence, batterers intervention courses, substance abuse classes, random drug testing, and alcohol testing, meetings with their caseworkers, as well as DHS court hearings. There's a lot involved in these ISPs. They work one-on-one with a mobility program coordinator to develop routines and habits. They establish routes. They maintain healthy ridership habits as they progress from fully assisted transportation to complete independence. Oh, aggressively again. I'm just not.
I snuck in a slide on
That
this.
is not even.
I snuck in a slide
I
there.
was like, that's not even my slide. Okay.
So that's just.
So that's Amy.
That's me, sorry. So this is the course that resides on CTAA's website that we developed with the Arnold Foundation funding on understanding passengers who have experienced trauma. So I just wanted to kind of trip you up a little bit.
Oh,
there,
I love it. Amy knew to throw me a curveball. Okay. Just kidding, moving on.
And it's free.
All right. So the Climb Ride program is now in its second full year of operation. It's received more than 200 applications for service. By identifying those in critical need of services through a series of intake questions, during their initial onboard process, we create what we term as super users, okay? So these are riders that consistently and actively use our services to engage in their service plans multiple times throughout the month. Generally, we become their main source of transportation for their case-related travel. What we've learned from this is that by becoming a member of their support team, we can significantly increase the potential for successful outcomes. So to date, Climb Ride's provided more than 6,000 rides. That's 6,000 more visitations, 6,000 more classes, 6,000 more opportunities to get back on track and reunite our families and our community. As with other transportation services, COVID impacted ridership. Because of the time sensitivity of our riders' appointments, The limited capacity on the fixed route systems all but took that option off of the table for us. It also contributed to facility closures and driver shortages. However, the flip side of that is that it also caused service providers to get more creative. They have started implementing some virtual format options for our riders, and for someone with transportation barriers, that is not all bad. So there were some bonuses in that situation, if there's a silver lining. The feedback's been tremendous. We are constantly hearing from parents and caseworkers how life-changing this program has been for them. They can now focus on reestablishing their families without further strain on already limited bandwidth. Great example of this would be John. We will call him John. Over the course of his case, ClimeRide provided 315 case-related trips for him, as well as providing him with 9 30-day bus passes to assist with transportation needs outside of the scope of the program, at a total expense of about $5,000. However, his case reunification ended in just 14 months, which is significantly shorter than the average reunification time of 18 months. Based on the calculations, just so that you guys are aware of what it costs to keep children in foster care, that saved approximately $10,000 by shortening the time to permanency. That is one parent, one child. Just imagine how much we could do with programs like this. So building strong partnerships with constant communications is imperative for programs like these. As transit professionals, we know firsthand about the struggles our communities face in just getting from point A to point B. By partnering with human service professionals, we can all work together to fill the gaps in our communities that continue to divide families. The ClimeRide program allows us to build a solid, innovative, human-centric approach to mobility as a service. What we hope to accomplish is a scalable and replicable model that shows how unique partnerships can break communication barriers and empower communities. So I appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Stephanie. And Stacy, I did not put any slides in yours, so you're safe.
Surprise.
So if we could switch the slides back over, and then we'll hear from Stacy.
Thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I am excited to talk to you a bit, not so much about one specific program, but about our work partnering with the healthcare sector. And so just before we're waiting for my slides. That's not good. Ooh, it's a video.
I did that.
Just by show of hands, is there anybody actually from the healthcare sector in the room today? Okay. We got one. Okay, we got a couple folks. Okay, so I'm going to make an assumption here that you both know more about the healthcare sector, way more than I do, but I think just coming at this from a very humbling perspective as we work with the healthcare sector, come from mobility management. I serve as the director of mobility management at HopeLink. We're a community action agency based in basically the greater Seattle area. So just to talk to you about kind of how we've worked with the healthcare sector. Over time, we've had to learn what is it that they care about, right? What is it that motivates them to work with us? Healthcare sector, again, I'm going to keep speaking to the two folks in the room that raised their hands, would know this, again, very well. Just very busy, and it's a completely different sector than what we work with in the transportation. But a few of the key points that we learned from them is, again, the importance of, for them, minimizing missed appointments, and the fact that what we've come to learn is transportation being one of the largest barriers of why appointments are missed. One of our key focuses for one of our projects was how do we reduce hospital readmissions. Again, I'm still, even after a full pilot, still trying to understand the penalties that come with it, but certain readmission rates, if they happen within the 30-day mark, come with a lot of penalties to the hospitals. And so how do we reduce the hospital readmission rate? By getting people to transportation post-discharge. And the third one that we've heard a lot about, and again, I'm probably not wording it the right way because, again, I come from the transportation sector, but is how do we optimize hospital beds with patients who actually need care? This has just come through conversations we've had with the healthcare sector of some patients have to stay, because they don't have transportation to get them home, right? So they're trying to get them out of the hospital as quickly as possible once they're well, so that they can have other patients use the hospital beds. So again, we've over time learned what is it that the healthcare sector cares about, and then how do we speak their language when we're talking about where transportation can fit into solutions. On the flip side, we also know from the transportation sector kind of what does it mean to the intersection with healthcare. One of the key things that we focused on in our region is how do we reduce the burden on finding and securing a ride. Really great that there is Medicaid transportation for folks, especially if you're going to a Medicaid billable appointment. But what happens when it's not Medicaid billable or you do not qualify for Medicaid for many reasons, that burden of trying to find and secure a ride for somebody going through the intake process, enrollment verification to ultimately get a ride is incredibly burdensome. And again, what can we be doing to make that easier for folks? Again, also a focus on getting people, of course, to medical appointments, but the phrase of social determinants of health has definitely become more popular, but really getting people to that wellness care. And again, these are not going to be appointments that are necessarily going to be Medicaid billable. And so, again, focusing on kind of not solely a certain trip type of just getting people to and from the doctor, but about other ways that we can make sure they maintain their quality of health. And then again, this other side of kind of ultimately optimizing the transportation system, right? How do we not just partner with one entity or one organization like paratransit that might be high cost, but how do we really optimize the transportation system so we can match somebody with the right transportation at the lowest cost to society at large. And that has been a huge focus of us within the transportation sector in our region. So kind of trying to combine these two purposes and working towards solutions. So stay with me here. I understand this is a very obnoxious acronym. I did hear about it from CTAA a few years ago. I think I'm going to blame
years ago.
Mizzy? Oh, I think I heard it from Scott. So again, I'm just, we're here today. I figured I'd insert it because this is actually what myself and my team, I have it on my whiteboard, like permanent marker, right? This is just what we focus on is BORPSAT. And it stands for a bunch of right people sitting around table. And I think when you think of stakeholder mapping, when you think of who do I need to be working with, just think of BORPSAT, right? Just embody that. Again, I know it's obnoxious, but it's really important that you're being very mindful of who are the right people we need to be working with. And again, whether it's a virtual table or in person, that we're working together. And I think the first one that is really called for success in working with the healthcare sector is transportation champions. And I would say don't try to assume it's going to be at a certain level or but somebody who really gets that transportation is a problem and is going to be that advocate for you within the healthcare sector. This is the person you can go to and ask those really weird questions. Can you explain these penalties to me? Can you really dive into Medicare or Medicaid? Again, I did not get a degree in healthcare, whatever that would be, and so you really need those transportation champions. And likely those are going to be somebody who, again, has experienced that burden. It's taken away their time in trying to figure out transportation. So that could be somebody at the front desk. That could be somebody that is completing time cards for folks and realizing that people are spending so much time worrying or focusing on transportation, but really find them, right? Go to stakeholder groups, talk about transportation to healthcare partners, and just figure out who is going to be that champion with you. Also, again, you're going to need to focus on healthcare leadership, getting that buy-in from the top, that they're bought into this, even though they might not be actively at your table. We've also had a lot of success working with discharge planners, and again, knowing that they might not necessarily be your transportation champions just because they're incredibly busy. It's so important to understand that perspective, and we've learned a lot with them in our work because, again, they're the ones that are likely trying to get them out of the hospital and getting them through that care plan. Also important to think about other sectors. Senior housing is one that we've worked with a lot because what ultimately ends up happening is if someone needs to get to the doctor or needs to get care, if they are in senior housing, they're going to be trying to work with a navigator there. And so they've become really big champions for us in understanding the needs of especially older adults. Also, if possible, please work with your NEMT broker. I know that's easier said than done, and we're very fortunate. I work at the agency that also is the NEMT broker, and so I know who to call when I have to have those questions. But again, you understand in a lot of cases Medicaid can be the solution, or the Medicaid broker can be the solution, but not all the time. So you'll be able to learn a lot from them in terms of who they can't serve. And then can't emphasize this enough, just working with community members and making sure they're at the table every time. Community member, community advocates. I know we've talked about that a lot, and offering compensation when feasible. And so what that results in, and I just kind of throw in another annoying acronym, is BORPTA. And when we've done our one of our projects, I really appreciated this. We actually had a community member saying, when are we gonna stop sitting around the table and when are we gonna take action? And I think you need to have both, and I think you need to start with having that planning discussion and getting the folks to the table, building that trust. But again, this is a whole new acronym for you, you're welcome. BORPTA, bunch of right people taking action. And then really what you'll be able to focus on is how do we change, how do we make change in the community? So again, I didn't go into the details of some of the projects we're working on because we are doing a few. I tried to add some links here, so if you have any follow-up questions, you can check that out, or of course contact me. But we did have ultimately a successful pilot in 2020 with our Care Mobility Rewards program that we worked with CTAA. I say successful. We launched mid-February of 2020, so that was a good time all around. And it was a partnership with the hospital, right, to reduce hospital readmission. So ultimately, even though the pilot was successful, we were able to reduce the readmission rate, and overall our hospital provider was incredibly satisfied with the pilot. COVID still being what it is, incredibly busy. So we've ultimately paused that program and have instead focused on implementing our one call, one click phase 1. I know one call, one click has been thrown out a lot today, and so our definition is a little bit different, moving beyond just service discovery and trip planning to ultimately offer ride request fulfillment and payment integration. So we're really pleased that we have the healthcare sector represented on the advisory committee. In fact, one of our transportation champions recently retired, and she gave us her personal email because she's so interested in still staying involved, which is really wonderful. We're also working really strategically to pilot this one call, one click with a local healthcare provider that's also a health plan provider. And so really being able to work with them on the details of the planning and implementation, but actually piloting it with that and knowing that it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all for each of the hospitals. You really have to work with them and their needs. And then ultimately, where we see this going in terms of supporting hospitals is, again, this payment integration for hospitals to be able to cover the costs for individuals. And again, some of the time that will go to Medicaid, but in a lot of cases, they're looking for solutions when Medicaid is not an eligible expense. So that's my presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you. So can we make this mic live? Yeah, thank you. And can we blank the screen if you don't mind, please? I know I can do it, but all right. So we're going to go. Thank you. Perfect. Before we get to your questions, Kirby, are there any questions? Kirby. There. Sorry. Are there any questions on the chat from our live chat at all? All right, no questions. Again, I encourage you guys who are on the live stream. This is also for you. So I have just a couple questions to pull out a few details, and then Nick would come to your question and the other questions in the audience. And we're going to take about 15 minutes for questions. Then we have our last presenters of the morning ready. Stephen, in the project, can you talk to me about what insights kind of fed into how you developed the project you did? What did you hear from the customers that they needed?
For the customers, they needed something that would be, reliable, cheap, would get them to where they're going, and also something that what kept coming up was just kind of staying semi-anonymous, I guess, too, which, I know this is a carpooling app, but it's not like Uber or Lyft or anything like that where you have to plug in, your license and get, like, background checks and stuff. So that anonymity is still there within it. And also something that payment wouldn't be an issue because a lot of people who use it, could potentially be unbanked. So we made sure when working with Waze that users who were unbanked would still be able to use it, and they can. It still requires a little bit of a hurdle. They have to get like one of those refillable debit cards, but they could still use it. Yeah.
Great. And Stephanie, same question to you. What did we hear? I was very thankful to be part. I learned so much from this project with Marilyn and with Stephanie. What did you hear? What did the target population we were trying to serve? What did you hear from them? What did they need?
So one of the biggest hurdles we've had to help them overcome is we are unfortunately dealing with high instability in our population. So things like available data on their phones. So when we send them trip details, they may not have data available to even click that link on their phone. They're constantly changing locations, home, and things of that nature. So the biggest thing we've found is that we have had to embed the mobility program coordinator with the DHS team and all of their parent support team and the service providers and the parent to overcome those challenges and make sure that we're communicating. Where are they? How do we get a hold of them? How do we notify them about changes? And that's been the biggest feedback, is just how do we keep the lines of communication open so we're really truly supporting these parents and not just dropping them off from point A to point B.
Great. And Stacy, for you, a slight skew on that question. What did you hear from the discharge planners? What is it they needed? Because I know they were a big piece of your project.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we learned, again, I really appreciated the human-centered design process. There was some assumption testing we were able to do, including being able to kind of offer a training to them about the program and then getting their feedback, adapting it. But what we really learned was over time when we were piloting it, they're just incredibly busy. And again, a little bit probably had to do with COVID and just everything that was going on, but it took a lot of reminders for them. So I think it doesn't take just giving them that training, that one-time training, and then assuming it'll be successful. Our pilot was dependent on them enrolling somebody into this program, right? Was for them to be able to identify that transportation was a barrier to getting them to their post-discharge follow-up appointments. And so we banked on, we waited around for the phone to ring, right? Because it depended on them. And so we had to constantly communicate with them. And I think one thing we learned was just being present with them, right? So we were always in their inbox, right? We were letting them know, hey, the service still exists, or hey, here's some FAQs that might be helpful for you all. We showed up, I can't say I did this, my team showed up and brought them donuts, and just reminded them, hey, we're still here, do you have any questions? We put up flyers at the hospital to just remind the discharge planners this program exists, because what happens in that is again, it's transportation, but it's everything else they have to focus on. And so again, how do we make it as easy as possible for them to enroll and not have that be a burden, but just make sure that they know, that remind them that that we're still here. And of course, when there's turnover, right, making sure you're there as soon as there is a new discharge planner hired.
Great, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to take just 2 questions from the audience, and I'm going to invite 3 of you, if you can stick around this afternoon, if you could grab a session for this afternoon, and there's so much richness about all 3 of these programs that we haven't had a chance to hear. If you guys are willing, I would love for you to put up a session over there and kind of just talk about, if you have time. Okay, thanks. And so a question here and a question. Go ahead, Kirby, with your question, and then we'll close up.
Yeah, my question is for Ms. Stacy. How exactly did this program of yours work? As far as the hospital and the transportation side, who did you have to put in place? Were there several hospitals involved that you guys had to? Because in my area, we have people going everywhere. Mm-hmm. And discharge planners, we don't know if this hospital have those, follow-up nurses. So I guess maybe not now, but maybe a little later, step-by-step process, because we could really use this, and it's like not working.
Yeah. Well, again, happy to go to all the details. The reason why I didn't focus on that is because our partnership with CTAA started in 2015, and we developed a business plan in 2016 of how we were going to work with hospitals. And so we have this amazing business plan, and ultimately what we learned from doing a pilot in 2020 was that technology changed, and COVID significantly impacted the ability to administer the program that we thought it would in our business plan. So happy to provide more resources. The URL had like our evaluation report, but we also, again, have a more thorough business plan. But it was very specific, partnering with one hospital in particular. And ultimately, we worked with the NEMT broker, which again was my agency, even though it wasn't me in charge of that, to be able to get people to their post-discharge follow-up care. So again, I'm happy to go into some of the specifics, but we do have that information online and easy to consume. But I think just one thing to note is because we had such a significant gap between when we initially developed our business plan and today, technology changed. And so how were we able to adapt to not only technology, but just the institutions, right? And how it shifted in our community. So it's a theory, and then ultimately what happened in practice is different. But yeah, happy to talk to you.
For both programs in Oklahoma City and Seattle, the partnership clearly was a huge part of that. What I wanted to ask is, so once through your right people at the table, you create the entry program and get people qualified, does somebody on the healthcare or social service partnership do the scheduling and management, or then is it once an individual who needs the program is enrolled, is it totally dependent upon them to do their own scheduling, or is it a mix of both?
I was like, she's sitting right here, okay. Okay, so actually, not only have I been the one that's developing the product, I am the day-to-day contact. I do all of the scheduling for every single passenger involved in our program, so I have contact daily with, all 200 of the people that we've talked to since enrollment. So yes, I work directly with the rider as well as their caseworker to schedule personally, so.
Oh, such an interesting question. Again, theory versus practice. So the way our theory worked with the 2015-2016 business plan was the discharge planners do it all, right? You have to go through the discharge planner. You have to be, and again, that made sense from the hospital being able to do that thorough evaluation of they qualified for this program and we're going to maximize profits, not just solely but they're actually the ones eligible for the program. What we've learned over time is it's a little difficult to, again, solely rely on discharge planners. And again, them understanding transportation. So again, we found transportation champions in the discharge planners. We did, but what we also found was that, senior housing, those navigators are finding, hey, I just had a resident that came home from the hospital and would have loved to also sign up in this program. And so I think, again, keeping that spirit of no wrong door, if possible, being able to offer both. And again, you're gonna have somebody who has that direct connection with the individual and can go through the thorough eligibility and sign them up. What we've really appreciated with our one call, one click model that we've really emphasized is the role of an assister. And again, that's gonna be the caseworker, a caregiver, somebody, and again, their experience of signing somebody up for transportation is gonna be different than if the end user was doing it. And so I really think we need to think, in the future of you gotta have both for it to be successful.
Okay, so again, very, very rich programs. I really encourage you, if you guys cannot, can you stay for a session in the afternoon? Fantastic. Go to hunt them out. There's a ton of good information there. God, I love all three programs. Thank you so very much. I really appreciate it. Okay, and then we're gonna go ahead and go live to Zoom. Like I said, our next presenters, it's actually 11 plus 6, so it's, what time is that, 5 and 6 o'clock at night for them. One's from Belgium, and like I said, and one is from Sweden. Janae, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you see me okay?
Oh, we can hear you, yes. Okay, Janae, I'm gonna let you take it away. And can we maybe dim the lights in the front, because they aren't in person, so we don't need to see them.
Excellent. All right, well, thank you so much, Amy. So you can hear me okay, just to double check?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Perfect. Okay, so I'll kick us off, including an introduction to Goran, and then we'll get right into it. So today our session is called Public Sector Roles and Mobility as a Service, Promoter, Partner, or Enabler. And first of all, I'll introduce Goran. So Goran is the Director of Research at the Research Institutes of Sweden, aka RISE, and he directs the Mobility and Transformation Unit there. We'll be talking a little bit about some of his research in different areas, but also very much focused on his PhD thesis, which he completed last year, and that's called Making Mobility as a Service Towards Governance Principles and Pathways. And I'm Janae. Amy and I work together at the National Center for Mobility Management. I am their one call, one click expert, and I also work on mobility as a service. So that's a little bit about me. I also have a firm called Civic Sphere. So today's session, just so you know a little bit about the flow, it's going to be kind of almost like a podcast interview style. So Gordon and I have worked together on a set of questions to kind of highlight some of the research that he's done that we think will be really applicable and interesting to the work of you folks there in the audience. So one thing to mention though, some of his work will be very much focused in Sweden or in Europe. And a lot of it will be in urban areas, but some of it will also be in rural areas. But just a side note on that, it's really all about how public sector roles are applicable in mobility as a service. So even though sometimes he'll be talking about urban contexts, we still, we really built the session around the fact that in the public sector, a lot of times we're trying to figure out how to work with big groups of people, how to make the right progress, how to set goals. And I think a lot of that's still applicable regardless of the type of geographic context. So Goran, before I kick it off with our questions, is there anything else you want to add in terms of just prefacing the session?
No, I would like to make sure that you can hear me all right.
Yes.
Can someone confirm that from the audience? I heard a small yes, I guess that, but then no. I thank you for that great introduction, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Amy, just to check, you can hear Goran loud and clear, right? Ah, okay. Sorry. So it's really
yes.
Yeah, I believe we're okay.
The audio we're getting from you guys is pretty faint, but we do hear you. All right.
All right, and we'll repeat any questions by mic so you can hear them better.
Perfect. Sounds like a good plan. All right. So Goran, we'll kick it off. So first, let's have a quick primer on what mobility as a service is and why it might matter to a small community. Could you tell us just a little bit about what you think mobility as a service is and what types of areas it encompasses?
Yes, as noted in this slide, I usually define MOS as a type of service that through a joint digital channel enables users to plan, book, and pay for multiple types of mobility services. So MOS is about the integration of new and traditional types of mobility services into multimodal offerings. So in other words, MOS makes mobility services accessible via one app and one contract. And the goal is generally to make it more attractive to combine complementary mobility services. And the hope is often that this will contribute to a modal shift away from car traffic in and around cities, as well as to improve accessibility in peri-urban areas and on the countryside. So for a small community, MOS can, at least in theory, make it possible for poor, for elderly and sick to stay, even if they cannot afford to drive. And the MOS can also make it more attractive to move to a small community for people that at most want to have one car within the family.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So something that Goran and I have been talking a lot about is that it's important for MOS projects to have really clear goals and objectives, often set by public sector partners, so that all the stakeholders can work toward the end result with some level of confidence in that bigger picture that they all share. So Goran, from your research, what are some of those common goals that you found that the public sector has, either that they developed internally or with some kind of public or user input?
Yeah, in my thesis work, I looked at Sweden, Finland, and Australia, and the goals are quite different across the three countries. And focusing here on Sweden and Finland, you can see that in Sweden, public transport authorities have had active and front seat roles in MOS developments since the very beginning, which was back in 2014. And this has led to a large focus on how MOS can contribute to the goals that the public transport sector has, such as growing public transport in terms of number of trips or market size. So the discussion has mostly focused around how MOS can contribute to making the transportation system more environmentally sustainable, although in recent years, the potential of addressing transport exclusion via MOS has become more prominent within the discussion, at least in Sweden. In Finland, however, there has been less talk about ecological sustainability as a driving factor, but more focus on reducing unnecessary spending on transport and to create new business opportunities for Finnish firms. In other words, they have been more focused on economic sustainability. And this is at least in part a result of the different contexts in which MOS conversation emerged in Finland. Because the MOS concept in Finland can arguably be interpreted as the crown jewel of sorts of the national government's efforts to revolutionize transport and to get Finland back on track after the economic crisis back in 2009.
Okay. And can you briefly tell us about what some of these mobility as a service efforts involved? You know, sometimes these projects can really run the gamut. They can be an app only, they might have a subsidy program, and tell us maybe a little bit about also the target audience.
Yes, it is the concept MOS and what you interpret as MOS is different across different people and different countries. But the way I defined it in the beginning, you can see that there are ongoing MOS pilots in Europe, in Asia, in North America, and Australasia at least. And the most renowned ones are probably WIM in Helsinki, maybe Jelby in Berlin, or VN Mobil in Vienna, Austria. But the first MOS service that was trialed in real-world conditions was here in Sweden and in the town that I'm currently at, which is Gothenburg. And that was back in 2013, 2014. And then 71 households located in or in the vicinity of this city, which has about 300,000 inhabitants, were recruited to participate in a pilot. And they were given customized and modifiable subscription plans, which they were invoiced on a monthly basis. They were given a prototype smartphone app through which they could access public transport tickets and book car sharing, bicycle sharing, rental cars, and taxis. And so using these tools, they solved their everyday travel needs for 6 months and reported their travel behavior and experiences via a bunch of different methods. And the results show that the group of participants appreciated, on average, the service, which was called Ubigo, as I said, and they were willing to pay for it. And moreover, the Ubigo or the entire experience influenced their travel behaviors toward less car use and more use of mobility services, cycling and walking. So these results resonated very well with the regional public transport authorities in Sweden, and therefore kickstarted a flurry of activities aimed at turning this first MOS concept into commercial services that are available for the general public in Sweden. And although I'm sad to say that we have not really succeeded in doing that yet, we have had many new pilots of other versions of MOS since then, and including, as I've mentioned to you before, quite a few targeting people in small rural communities.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, just to kind of change gears a bit, so in the work that Amy and I have been doing with NCMM on mobility as a service, we've been thinking about how MOS goals are not necessarily focused on moving people away from car use. There's a lot of discussion on that internationally, but especially in small communities with less robust public transit options, we've been thinking a lot about how MOS can almost be more like the goal of one call, one click systems, which I know has come up in the previous session, which is in some ways simpler. It's about helping people be aware of all the mobility options, helping them access them all, and helping them to use them together for trip chaining, and just thinking about the most applicable technology to do that. Have you come across any efforts internationally that sort of go along with that line of thinking?
Yes, and I recently, you said internationally, but I want to go back to Sweden. And I recently, because I recently analyzed 5 cases of what I call rural MOS in Sweden. And all of them are, rather than replacing car ownership and use, which has been the prime focus in urban areas, they are meant to complement the public transport offering in rural areas by providing a joint digital tool for accessing regular public transport, the public transport on demand services that we have, and the commercially available or the available commercial mobility services, which often is a taxi and sometimes other services as well. But they moreover have aimed, many of them, at making or providing tools to make it easier for rural dwellers to organize citizen-led mobility services that can complement the ones offered by the public transport authority or by the market. And these includes community car sharing and ride sharing most of the time. So from the perspective of the public transport authorities in Sweden, the hope has been for a relatively small investment, make it easier to combine and complement public transport with other means of mobility, and in some cases including telecommuting and home deliveries. So sometimes spanning outside person mobility.
Yeah,
or passenger mobility.
Cool, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And while we're on this chain of thinking, I do want to bring up the phone. The phone is kind of it's getting less and less popular these days. And I mean, the real, not the one with all the apps, but just the regular old phone. So it's still really important in the US for one call, one click operations. In some of our areas, the broadband internet or strong data networks just have a lot of gaps, or they might not be as reliable. I don't know about the situation in Sweden. You can tell us some more about that. And we also just have customers that for various reasons prefer the phone, even though we might have web-based or mobile-based options. So could you tell us more about that? Mobility as a service, of course, has this digital component, but when we think about phones, can it merge the two together? Can we think about how phone services go back over to digital components?
Yes, and I, of course, I do not know the data, but I believe that we have better broadband connection in Sweden compared to the US, and we have a higher penetration rate for smartphones. But still, having only a smartphone app as the means for accessing the MOS service, this has been a barrier to entry in many of these cases. That has meant that we have an underrepresentation of children, of course, of elderly, and of people that for one reason or another do not want to use smartphones or don't have access to a smartphone. So to make the system equitable and accessible, it is, I believe, important to provide other means as well to access it. And for users who have broadband at home, at least, trip planners that integrate DTF Flex for demand responsive trips are one such emerging area to take note of for smaller communities, I think. And in the US, I think you know more about this than I do, but I've heard of, for example, this project in Vermont that includes demand response options alongside all the fixed routes. And this is based on an open source software that you might be aware of that's called Open Trip Planner. And I believe that they also may have plans to display this DTF Flex data in Google Maps directly. So this is a tool that people can use at home to consider all their options before they head out. And these phone details are provided to tie the phone and the web together in this case.
Mm-hmm. And for those of you, just a little heads up on this part of the slide, this just tells you a little bit more about those phone-based options. So this is the Vermont Department of Transportation, VTrans, started this project a few years back, actually, and they've already gone through a few iterations. But it really includes all the fixed route options and all the demand response options across the whole state, so that people can have that all that information at their fingertips, basically. So thanks for mentioning that, Warren. So basically, we've been talking a lot about technology so far. We've talked a little bit about goals, and a lot of times MOS, when people talk about it, it really goes right into that tech aspect of it. Could you tell us more about, is it more well-rounded than we might think of it? And if so, what are those other components?
Yeah, this is a main critique that I write quite a bit about in my thesis, and I often argue with other people about, because to me, MOS is far from just a new app. To provide a level of service that is on par with car ownership or alleviates the pains of trip chaining or some other pains, the service must include many more components than just a new well-functioning app. And this includes, of course, a higher value for money, great support systems, and an overall positive user experience. So yes, there are many more components to the MOS service, and there are many institutions that guides whether people adopt MOS or not. And this is another, to me, important and potentially discouraging contribution of my thesis, and that is that it illustrates how complex the process of realizing MOS really is. And this is something we did not understand in Sweden when we set out on this journey. And for instance, just to mention a few things, the regulatory environment here for personal mobility is not adjusted for either new forms of shared mobility or for MOS. And the fact that so many actors are involved in the process of delivering MOS makes it difficult to develop business models that are viable for everyone. And of course, the private car is a fierce competitor, practically, culturally, and habitually, thus impeding MOS adoption. So despite all of its claims of making mobility better for the end users, and all the money invested in technological development and piloting, MOS has unfortunately not made a very big difference for many people thus far, at least that I know of.
So given kind of this wide range of your expertise and research, what have you been thinking that you suggest for others to do? So let's say that I'm someone who works in a public sector organization in the US. What would you recommend?
Yeah, I focus quite a bit on this, of course, because I don't want my only contribution to be that I say that this is harder than you think. I want to offer more advice than that. And based on my research on the developments in Sweden, Finland, and Australia, I propose a set of 15 actions for public actors that wish to facilitate and steer MOS developments. So facilitate the action and then also steer towards contributing to policy objectives. And here in this slide, I've tried to sum it up in 3 overarching principles. And the first one is to set an inspirational vision, which I think is needed to motivate and guide MOS developments. And the public sector should therefore set up this long-term vision that is based on transport policy objectives. And this must be done, and we have seen this very importantly, that it must be done in some form of collaboration with private sector and social sector actors. And here I think even though you might not agree with that vision, you can draw inspiration from Finland, where the ministry has really managed to get many actors excited about shared image of future personal mobility, where as I said, MOS is the crown jewel. So then on the second point, the work of realizing the vision must be coordinated, of course, and the public sector must therefore develop an agenda for MOS developments. And we have had such agendas in Sweden and Australia, and they have been very useful. But still, I would argue that our agendas have been too narrow. And to really have effect, they must address more of the institutional barriers that hinder MOS developments than what we have done. So future agendas should, in addition to activities directly related to the MOS concept, also promote activities that strengthen mobility services and which weaken the private car regime, at least in and around cities. And here my research identifies a potential reinforcing relationship between introducing MOS and introducing car restricting policies. MOS can be the carrot that makes it easier to introduce sticks, basically. And then on the last point there, empirical evidence on the effects of MOS is needed, and systematically analyzed long-term and large-scale experiments are a must to develop this evidence base. So public actors should invest in MOS experimentation and in the form of pilots and operations. But beyond funding, MOS experimentation also requires a more risk-prone attitude within the public sector than what we have seen thus far. And this could be facilitated by complementing this long-term vision for MOS with medium-term goals focused on learning and by introducing some slack when it comes to short-term performance. At least that's what we are trying here in Western Sweden.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. And you also mentioned in your thesis that a public sector actor can have basically one of two sets of, or one of two types of operative roles that all MAS projects require. Could you tell us more about those and how they differ and which one might be more appropriate depending on where someone wants to head?
Yeah, this is a major reason for the complexity I mentioned earlier and keep coming back to, is that MAS introduces two new operative roles to the value chain for mobility services. We have MAS integrators that assemble data from mobility service providers, data and tickets. And then we have MAS operators that package and sell MAS to users. And one or several actors must adopt these roles to make MAS happen. And the discussion about who should do so has been lively, to say the least. And especially the debate has focused on whether the public or the private sector or both should adopt them. And currently, at least across Europe, we have different countries are heading in different directions here.
Mm-hmm. Well, Amy, we'll do a Q&A period. Is that correct? What time do you want us to stop at?
Hey, Janae. Janae. Can you hear me, Janae?
Yes, I can now.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes for a Q&A session.
So we still have 20 minutes left?
Yes. I don't know what time it is right now, but until 11:45. So till then.
Excellent.
I'm going to open the floor now to anyone who may have a question.
That sounds good.
And we do have one, so walking the mic over now.
Hello, thank you, Dr. Smith. So I just had a question on the role of data sharing policies on a national level. I'm aware that Austria and Finland, they've imposed some regulation to help catalyze sharing between private entities as well. So how important is that to create an environment for MAS?
Thank you for that question. I didn't catch your name, so sorry for that. But data sharing is indeed important here. And as you are very correct, or you're on the money on the fact that in Finland, they have introduced a legislation that forces all providers of mobility services in Finland to open up their data and their ticketing systems so that other actors can resell their offerings. So, and this has been argued. If you look at this slide, if you want to head towards the market-driven scenario, this is argued to be important because you need to have the data, of course, and the tickets from public transport authorities, as well as from all the commercial mobility service providers, to be able to create an interesting MAS offer. But they have headed that route. In Sweden, we have had a different tactics. We're heading more towards what I call the public-private scenario, where we introduce some type of legislation, or that's proposed at least, but it's not yet decided on. But that's not as is not as forceful as the one in Finland. But instead, we combine that with developing this national platform, or not so much of a technical platform, but more of a process one and a knowledge-based one that can help different and a standard based on standards that can help both public transport authorities and private sector mobility service providers to open up their ticketing system and to sign general agreements so that other actors can resell their offerings. So I think you need to solve that. Data sharing is a big issue, and there's a lot of mistrust between actors, and there's a lot of thinking that you have to have control of the data, and the one who owns the data, that will be the new oil, and they will, rule the market. So you have to solve that, and you can do it either through legislation or through many other different policy means. I'm not sure which one is better yet, but I need this is a big barrier that you need to address. Yeah, I agree with you there.
Just a quick mention on that Vermont project, for those of you who aren't familiar with it, if I'm not mistaken, they've made all the data public. So basically what Vermont did was they went and created the general transit feed specification data sets. There's one that's just the GTFS for the fixed route transit. There's another data set called GTFS Flex for the demand response data that you saw displayed. And then they put that into a software to be viewed called Open Trip Planner. It's a modified version of it, actually. So it's kind of customized to what Vermont needed. But so there's kind of a two-step process there, right? And the first step is creating those data. And then what they've done, which is always a good practice, is to go ahead and make that data public so that it can be ingested by other types of apps, public sector, private sector, what have you. So I believe that it's actually on, if you're familiar with Transit, the app, I believe it's also ingested there, so you can just use those results. So that's kind of one way that an agency, by virtue of just creating that data, even if you don't go that other step, it just enables it to be used in other ways.
Yep, thank you so much. Just one more question on the Vim app. So that's been has been used as an example for mobility as a service for quite some time. I just wanted to check if in your research you came across the performance of that app. Like, so you said that Finland had an objective to reduce unnecessary spending on transportation. Has the Vim app or other similar MaaS platforms actually helped in that effort, or has there been some study to understand their impact?
That is a great question, and I'm sad to say that I don't believe that you can draw those conclusions yet. The Vim app, I know that it's mentioned a lot, and I keep mentioning it too, but that is not they have not been very open with their data, MaaS Global. So there is one report that analyzes the first year of that it was in service in Helsinki, but I would argue that the quality of that report is not great. So we don't really know that, and so the only thing we know we know from smaller scale trials that there is some of them have managed to drive behavior change. We have seen that in Sweden, we have seen it in Sydney, Australia, and we have seen it, I believe, in the Netherlands. But whether or not they contribute in the long term to these bigger objectives of either driving behavior change in the long term, or reducing costs, or reducing transport exclusion, we haven't really seen any MaaS services at that scale and that and during that time frame or that longer period yet, so we can draw any of those conclusions. I think we have indicative evidence, but we cannot really say yet.
Okay, thank you.
In comparing Europe and Australia to America, do you feel that all of the modal choices are more prevalent in the non-US locations? And I guess thinking here, it seems like every community has an individual struggle about scooters and bike shares, and do you do like zip car rentals, and in that every community is kind of fighting that battle individually. Do you feel like that's the same globally, or is there sort of a more cohesive approach to at least even just getting the mode share offerings together in other countries?
I think at least in Sweden, when it comes to e-scooters, I think that's it's comparing my experience from Sydney to Sweden and Finland. It is really different because Sydney is a much bigger city. They therefore have many more offers of mobility services. In many Swedish cities, we don't have that many different. We have many providers of e-scooters, of the e-scooter sharing services. We have, taxi companies. We have some car sharing services, but not many. So the case is really different from if you look not only between urban and rural, but also if you look at those bigger cities, and you have, of course, many of them in the U.S. where you have all these, this bigger palette of different mobility services. But to come back to your point, I think at least we can see in Sweden and in the Nordics that every municipality and every region is fighting their own battle with this here too. Unfortunately, we don't have a similar response in Sweden. I am sure that there are other countries that are better at it, but we have not been quick enough to adapt in a similar way. And I think this creates problems for the companies, of course, that try to provide these services. It creates problems for users as well that face different conditions in different cities. I'm not sure do you want to add anything to that, Jenny?
No, that sounds, yeah, you would know more about that for sure. I'm not really familiar with that topic.
Hi, this is Stacy, and I presented earlier and mentioned we have a one call, one click. And as a nonprofit provider, but the designated mobility management program, I think we're in a really great place to implement a one call, one click because we're not focused just on one transit agency. And we are really fortunate. We have a lot of the transit agencies in our region who are bought into our one call, one click and want to see it successful. But we also really want to focus on those smaller providers, a volunteer driver program that's serving, a particular neighborhood. So do you have any advice or success stories of, what it takes to bring all these providers, big and small, along on this journey and making sure that, again, those smaller providers are not left out of this conversation? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think I agree with you that you are in a good position to do that, because what I've seen is that it makes a difference who that actor is that try to assemble the offerings and try to bring different actors together. And it is important to be seen as neutral in a sense. So because we have that power struggle, of course, that the Public Transport Authority, they are really the big fish in their small pond in almost every place across or everywhere, because at least in Sweden, we have a monopoly situation. And then we have these even bigger actors that are international, such as Uber, that we don't really feel that we can influence. And then we have these small local players that are delivering a car sharing services or a taxi or whatever. So we really have very different institutional logics and very different situations and goals for the different actors that you have to bring together. And I think I've actually written a paper on that, analyzing the actor in Sweden that tried to do it back in, I think it's 3 or 4 years ago. And one of the things that they were positive about them was this sense of neutrality. Another thing that what they lacked was that they required too much too soon. I think is really important, and I think I'm not sure if it was you or someone else that just when I logged in spoke on that point, that it's really important there to be iterative, to make the least viable products and to try them out with people, and you don't have to have all the technical maturity at once. You don't have to have all the services at once. You have to develop something that is promising and that can deliver learning in the short term and a lot of societal value in the long term.
And one thing to add on to that, go ahead. Sorry, Goran.
I would just say if you want, if you have, I think my email is on somewhere here. Please send in the email and I can send you this paper where I write about that at length.
Excellent. Yeah, just one thing to add on that Vermont example that we mentioned. I don't think it's any coincidence that of all the US states who did something like this, which is really transformative, it is a state with a large rural population and not a lot of big urban centers. because I used to work in Atlanta for a long time, and sometimes the conversation in Georgia, it's really hard because we have huge rural areas, but we also have, we have the Atlanta metro area, but we have a number of other metro areas. And so sometimes there's the feeling that some people's voices get lost in that. So I think Vermont is such an interesting test case because they're almost kind of advocating for the fact that, this has to be all the providers in the whole state, which is frankly pretty unique from what I've seen so far across US states. So yeah, so I think that sometimes players can position themselves to play that advocacy role for those smaller transportation providers.
Okay, so I think we're going to call it there. Janae, do you have one more slide that shows contact info, maybe your email address, or was that way in the beginning?
I have it right here.
Okay, wonderful. So there you have it. Janae, like I said, works with NCMM as our one call, one click, and our MOS expert. So I encourage you to reach out to her at any point in time. I promo Janae, so you know, at the very beginning of the conference, our up-and-coming MOS Resource Center. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent.
Goran and Janae, thank you for spending your evening with us, not your afternoon or your morning. I really appreciate the time. And everybody, can we just say thank you to them for joining? I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
And thank you, Janae.
Yes, you guys.
Thank you for joining us, Goran.